Welcome to Boring History for Sleep, where the past is weird, the facts are oddly soothing, and nodding off is practically guaranteed. Tonight, we're tucking you into the strange, scratchy sheets of medieval life, because nothing says sweet dreams like chamber pots, candlelight, and sleep habits so bizarre, you'll wonder if melatonin was invented out of sheer desperation. Did you know people used to sleep in 2 shifts, feared demons stealing their dreams, and even believed snoring could summon the devil? No? Perfect, because by the time we're done unraveling these sleepy oddities, you'll be halfway to dreamland, whether you like it or not. So, fluff your hay-stuffed pillow, cozy up under your woolen blanket, and let's drift into the dusty, dimly lit world of medieval bedtime. Weird? Yes. Boring? Also yes, but that's the magic. Let's begin. 1. Beds were a privilege, not a guarantee. Let's slip into the soft shadows of a medieval home where the idea of a bedroom doesn't quite exist the way we imagine it today. In fact, just having a bed at all, a real raised structure with a frame and a mattress, was considered a luxury. For many people of the medieval world, the night meant finding any available space to curl up in, whether that was beside a hearth, under a table, or next to a pile of stored turnips. For the peasant class, especially those living in small one-room cottages, the bed was a shared communal object, if it existed at all. There was no such thing as my bed in the possessive sense. There was the bed, and if you were lucky, you might be invited into it, alongside a few family members, a sibling, or even the family dog. Otherwise, you made do with straw scattered in a corner or a wooden bench with a bit of cloth. Mattresses, when they existed, were not the fluffy clouds we think of today. They were stuffed with straw, reeds, or sometimes hay. Over time, these materials flattened and became prickly, not to mention infested with insects. The lucky few who could afford wool or feather-stuffed bedding had to guard it carefully. These were prized items, sometimes included in dowries, and passed down through generations. Beds also weren't just a place to sleep. They were central fixtures in the home. In fact, in wealthier homes, beds were among the most expensive pieces of furniture. Elaborately carved and draped with heavy curtains to block drafts, they were symbols of status and comfort. These 4-poster beds didn't just offer privacy, they helped keep in precious warmth during long, cold nights. The wooden canopy and thick hangings created a miniature room within a room. Curiously, the best bed in a house wasn't always for the owner. In many households, especially among the upwardly mobile middle class, the finest bed was reserved for guests. This wasn't just hospitality, it was status signaling. A well-made guest bed showed you had means, taste, and manners. Shakespeare even mentions this in his will, famously leaving his second-best bed to his wife, likely a reference to the bed they actually used together, since the best was meant for visitors. In castles or manor houses, the bed was practically a throne. Lords and ladies didn't just sleep there, they held court, received guests, and even dined from bed. Servants and attendants might wait just beyond the drawn curtains. Sleep was private, but never truly alone. So the next time you fluff your pillow or slide under a duvet, consider this. For many in the medieval world, sleep meant making do with whatever you could find. And if you had a bed at all, you were already better off than most. Now, with that little journey into the straw-filled corners of medieval sleep, we'll gently wander toward the next strange habit of the past, one that unfolds not with a yawn, but a curious interruption in the middle of the night. 2. Sleep in shifts, medieval, first sleep, and second sleep. Imagine drifting off under a thatched roof in a quiet medieval village. Outside, the crickets chirp, the wind whistles through the cracks in the wooden shutters, and the fire in the hearth has burned low. It's dark, darker than most of us today can imagine. No humming street lamps, no phone screens, just the still, sacred black of the medieval night. And here's where it gets curious. People in the Middle Ages didn't sleep the way we do now, in one long, continuous stretch. No, their night was divided in 2. This wasn't strange or irregular, it was the expected norm. They had what was called a first sleep, sometimes called dead sleep or deep sleep. It usually began not long after sunset. After a long day of labor, farming, weaving, smithing, cooking, people would go to bed quite early, often just a few hours after dusk. But they didn't stay asleep all night. Around midnight or just after, they would naturally awaken, without alarm clocks or roosters. The house would stir. Some would sit up, stoke the fire, tend to children, or step outside for air. Others remained in bed, quietly thinking, talking, or praying in the dark. This time was known simply as the watch, and far from being annoying or disruptive, it was seen as a peaceful, even sacred time. Some used it for introspection, a kind of built-in meditation period built into the rhythm of daily life. Others would write in journals, whisper stories, or enjoy hushed moments with loved ones. Monks and religious households were particularly attuned to this period. The midnight waking matched certain canonical hours for prayer. For everyone else, it was just a part of life. No one questioned it. They didn't try to force themselves back to sleep. They accepted the gap and eventually drifted into their second sleep, which lasted until dawn or shortly after. Interestingly, this segmented sleep was so normal, people didn't even consider it worth explaining most of the time. It just showed up in passing mentions in diaries, letters, and even in legal documents. For example, court records from the period might describe someone committing a crime between the first and second sleep, and everyone would know exactly when that meant. The idea of sleeping straight through the night is a modern invention born out of electric lighting and industrial work schedules. As the world grew brighter and busier, the space between sleeps disappeared, not because people stopped needing it, but because the rhythms of nature were replaced by the hum of machines and glowing clocks. So tonight, as you settle into bed and perhaps wake up in the wee hours, don't be alarmed. Somewhere deep in your wiring, you might just be echoing the rhythm of your medieval ancestors, resting not once but twice with a little pause in between. Now, speaking of things worn in the night, let's slip softly into the quiet woolen world of medieval sleepwear, a far cry from modern pajamas. 3. Sleepwear and nightcaps, dressing for bed without central heating. Now, let's wander into a quieter, colder part of the medieval night. The part where getting ready for bed wasn't just about brushing your teeth and switching off the light, but about arming yourself against the cold. You see, without central heating or even insulation in most homes, bedtime in the Middle Ages was a battle against the chill. Walls were often made of stone, packed earth, or rough timber. Windows were drafty or just holes covered in cloth or wooden shutters. The hearth fire might still glow faintly, but once the embers died out, the cold crept in like a silent guest. And so, bedtime was not an undressing ritual, but quite the opposite. People dressed up to go to bed. The average medieval sleeper wore a long nightshirt, typically made of wool or linen. For the poorer classes, it might have been the same tunic worn all day, or a spare shift if they were lucky. Linen was softer but harder to afford. Wool was scratchier but warmer. These garments weren't frilly or decorated. They were practical and long, often reaching to the ankles to trap body heat. On particularly cold nights, people might add extra layers, shawls wrapped around shoulders, or even cloaks draped over the bed like an extra blanket. The very poor often slept in whatever they wore during the day, not out of choice, but necessity. Clothing doubled as warmth and protection from the cold air that seeped through every crack. And then there was the nightcap, not a fanciful accessory, but a surprisingly essential piece of sleep gear. These caps covered the head and ears, helping to retain body heat, which escapes rapidly from the head, especially in freezing temperatures. For men, they were usually plain and pointed. For women, they might resemble the linen coifs worn during the day. Nightcaps also helped reduce the chances of catching what people then called a cold in the head, believed to cause headaches or worse. Feet were another cold spot, so woolen socks or even wrappings of cloth were commonly worn to bed. It wasn't uncommon for people to tuck their feet close to a warm stone or a shared furry friend if one was available. Interestingly, what people wore to bed could still signal their social class. Nobles had soft linens, imported silks, and embroidery, even in sleepwear. The wealthy sometimes wore embroidered robes or soft fur-lined sleeping garments. Meanwhile, common folk had to make do with rougher fabrics, often patched and repurposed. Yet, no matter their status, everyone, from serf to sovereign, faced the same creeping night air. The darkness made equals of them all, and so they bundled up, pulled down their woolen caps, and nestled into whatever warmth they could gather. Tonight, as you slide beneath your blankets, perhaps in cotton pajamas, warmed by the gentle hum of a radiator, spare a thought for those who slept in layers of wool by a dying fire under roofs that whispered with the wind. And speaking of warmth, let's next explore the clever and sometimes questionable ways people kept cozy through the night, long before the invention of the electric blanket. 4. Staying warm. Stones, stoves, and snoring animals. Let's settle into the frost-kissed silence of a medieval night, where warmth wasn't a guarantee, but a nightly concern. One solved with creativity, caution, and cuddly company. Without insulation or thermostats, the battle against the cold wasn't fought with a dial on the wall. It was fought with stone, fire, fur, and flesh. One clever solution came in the form of heated stones. People would place large, smooth rocks near the hearth during the evening, letting them soak up the day's fire. Then, just before bed, they'd wrap these stones in cloth, usually wool or linen, and tuck them under the blankets at their feet. The warmth didn't last the whole night, but it bought them precious comfort during those first biting hours in bed. Then there were bed warmers, which might sound cozy, but came with a fair amount of danger. These were shallow metal pans filled with glowing embers from the hearth, closed with a lid and attached to a long wooden handle. Servants or household members would slide the pan between the sheets and gently move it around, trying to warm the mattress before anyone climbed in. Done too quickly or left in too long, however, the result could be scorched sheets, or worse, a house fire. And yet it was a common practice, especially in colder regions. But not everyone had warm rocks or bed warmers. In the humbler homes of the countryside, people relied on something far more organic: animals. That's right, in many peasant cottages, especially during winter, it wasn't uncommon for livestock to share the living space. Chickens might roost in the rafters, a goat could be tethered in the corner, and a pig might snooze by the hearth. Their body heat added a few degrees of precious warmth to the single-room home, and their breathing added a kind of low, rhythmic company. In fact, in some cases, sleeping beside animals wasn't just practical. It was necessary. A shared life meant shared warmth. Children might fall asleep to the sound of a cow's slow exhale or the comforting presence of a dog curled by their legs. It may not sound glamorous, but in a world where a freezing night could be deadly, warmth came before comfort. Now compare that to the grander homes and castles where fireplaces were installed in upper chambers. These weren't for luxury, they were for survival. Even so, heat from a castle fireplace didn't spread far. The fire was often small, the stone walls icy. So bed curtains, tapestries, and even wall hangings were all part of an attempt to trap heat inside, turning a drafty room into something just tolerable. Nobles had more resources, but they still slept under mountains of blankets and furs. And then there were the subtle rituals of warmth, warming one's hands by the fire before bed, drinking a hot spiced ale, or sitting close to a loved one, sharing not just words, but warmth, the most human kind of heat there is. So the next time you pull up a soft blanket or stretch your feet toward a warm radiator, remember the old tricks: a stone at your toes, a sleepy cow at your side, or the gentle heat of embers under a sheet. Now that we're warm and tucked in, let's tiptoe into another quiet part of the medieval night, not the physical, but the spiritual. Because for many, sleep wasn't just rest, it was sacred. 5. Superstitions and sleep protection rituals. In the medieval world, the veil between the waking and sleeping realms was believed to be thin, fragile, and full of unseen dangers. Night was not simply a time for rest, it was a time when shadows moved just a bit too close, when spirits roamed, and when your very soul was vulnerable. Sleep wasn't just a bodily necessity, it was a state of spiritual risk and mysterious power. For medieval people, superstitions and rituals were woven deeply into the fabric of nightly life. Because sleep was the gateway to dreams, and dreams were believed to carry messages from the divine or warnings from malevolent forces, protecting oneself in bed was an urgent and sacred business. Hanging garlic, herbs, and iron. The night's defenses. One of the most common practices involved hanging protective objects above or near the bed. Garlic, herbs, and iron were the frontline defenses against evil spirits, witches, and demons that prowled the night. Garlic, long known for its pungent smell and medicinal properties, was thought to have the power to repel not only vampires, a myth that's more recent but with medieval roots, but also all kinds of malicious entities. Strands of garlic bulbs were often hung over doorways, windows, and crucially, over beds. The sharp scent was believed to ward off any invisible threats lurking in the dark corners. Alongside garlic, bundles of herbs such as rosemary, sage, and lavender were also commonplace. Rosemary was considered especially potent, its fragrance believed to clear the mind and protect the soul. Women might carry sprigs under their pillows, or whole bunches would hang in the room. Sage was burned to cleanse spaces before sleep, and lavender's calming scent was thought to encourage peaceful, safe dreams. But perhaps most fascinating of all was the use of iron, often in the form of horseshoes or iron nails. Iron was considered a powerful metal, one that could disrupt the power of spirits and witches, who were thought to be repelled by its presence. In many homes, an iron object would be nailed above the bed or placed under the mattress, acting as an invisible shield against any malevolent force trying to cross into the sleeper's soul. Bedposts and crosses, carving protection into furniture. Physical defenses weren't just hung, they were carved. Many medieval beds, especially in more religious households, were decorated with carved crosses on the bedposts. This wasn't merely ornamental. The cross was a sacred symbol of protection, a sign invoking divine guardianship over the sleeper. It was believed to create a spiritual barrier, a sacred circle of safety within which one could rest without fear. Sometimes crosses were scratched into the wooden walls or even painted onto the ceiling above the bed. Some families might have inscribed short prayers or holy verses into the frame, transforming the very bed into a consecrated space. This idea of marking one's sleeping place with protective symbols was not limited to crosses. Other religious or mystical symbols might be used, depending on local beliefs and traditions, but the Christian cross was the most widespread and powerful icon in medieval Europe. Sleep demons. The incubus, succubus, and the night's terror. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of medieval sleep superstition was the belief in sleep demons, particularly the incubus and succubus. These were supernatural beings said to prey on sleepers during the night, especially targeting women and men when they were most vulnerable. The incubus was imagined as a male demon that would lie upon sleeping women, draining their life force, causing nightmares, and even leading to illness or death. The succubus, its female counterpart, was said to seduce sleeping men, stealing their vitality and leaving them weak or spiritually damaged. These demons were more than just frightening stories. They were real concerns that shaped how people thought about sleep. Reports of night terrors, sleep paralysis, or vivid nightmares might be interpreted as attacks by these malevolent spirits. To protect themselves, people turned to various rituals and charms. Some believed that keeping a Bible or other holy book under the pillow or beside the bed would repel the demons. Others carried small religious relics or amulets blessed by priests. And again, the presence of iron and garlic was said to keep these beings at bay. In some regions, stories of incubus and succubus were woven into moral lessons about virtue, temptation, and sin, reflecting deeper anxieties about sexuality and the unknown. Prayers and rituals before sleep. In addition to physical protections, the medieval sleeper relied heavily on prayers and rituals to guard their soul through the night. Many families had specific prayers they recited before bed. These could be simple invocations asking for God's protection, or longer, more elaborate prayers calling upon saints and angels to watch over the house. The Our Father and Hail Mary were among the most commonly whispered. For those who were deeply religious, bedtime might be the last act of the day, a moment of reflection and spiritual preparation for the vulnerable hours ahead. Some believed that speaking these prayers aloud could keep the dark forces at bay, while others murmured them silently, almost like a lullaby. In monasteries and convents, the night was punctuated by ritual prayers, known as the nocturnes, or the Office of the Dead, which involved chanting in dim candlelight. The monastic community viewed sleep as a temporary death, a period when the soul was especially vulnerable, requiring divine protection. For common folk, these rituals might take simpler forms: crossing oneself, sprinkling holy water on the bed, or placing a crucifix nearby. Sometimes a parent or elder would bless a child's bed, asking for protection from nightmares and evil spirits. Dreams as messages. The spiritual importance of sleep. Sleep was not only a time to escape the dangers of waking life, but also a bridge to the spiritual world. Dreams were taken seriously. They were believed to be messages from God, warnings, or even glimpses of the afterlife. Because of this, protecting sleep wasn't just about staying warm or comfortable. It was about safeguarding the soul's journey through the night. Some medieval texts contain long sections interpreting dreams, and entire chapters in books of divination focused on protecting oneself from bad dreams or nightmares. To dream badly was not just unpleasant, it was a spiritual risk. This belief made the rituals around bedtime especially important. If sleep was disturbed by evil spirits, the dreamer could lose favor with God or suffer harm. Keeping evil at bay was a spiritual imperative, not just a superstition. Community knowledge and variation. These sleep protections varied widely across regions, reflecting local traditions, climates, and beliefs. In some areas, other herbs might replace garlic. In others, special prayers or folk charms were more important than crosses. Traveling minstrels and merchants carried tales of strange rituals from faraway lands, influencing local customs. But throughout Europe, the idea of defending the sleeper's soul was universal. Bedtime was never taken lightly. It was a time of both vulnerability and hope, when the physical and spiritual worlds met. The legacy of medieval sleep superstitions. Many of these medieval sleep superstitions have faded but never fully disappeared. Some hang on in cultural traditions and folklore. The garlic over the door, the iron horseshoe nailed above the bed, the bedtime prayer, they echo into modern times, relics of a world where night was a vast, mysterious frontier. Today, we might laugh at the idea of incubus and succubus, or the fear that a bad dream could bring harm. But at its heart, these beliefs reveal something timeless: the deep human need to feel safe, protected, and cared for when we are at our most vulnerable, when we close our eyes and surrender to sleep. 6. Dream interpretation, messages from beyond. In the quiet, shadowed hours of the medieval night, when the world seemed still and the veil between worlds thin, dreams held a powerful place in the hearts and minds of those who lived by faith, fear, and mystery. To medieval people, dreams were not merely random flickers of the imagination or the brain's leftover puzzles. They were sacred messages, glimpses into other realms, divine warnings, or cosmic guidance sent to the sleeper from beyond. Sleep was a journey, but dreams were the signposts along the way, full of symbols, omens, and voices from the unknown. Dreams as divine communication. The prevailing belief was that dreams could be a form of divine communication. The Almighty, angels, saints, or even departed souls could speak through dreams, offering advice, warnings, or encouragement. Stories from religious texts, including the Bible, were full of prophetic dreams. Joseph's dream in Genesis foretelling the future of Egypt was one of the most famous. This biblical precedent deeply influenced medieval attitudes toward their own nighttime visions. People believed that through dreams, God could reveal future events, reveal hidden truths, or guide personal decisions. A dream wasn't just a private mental experience. It was a potential message from heaven, a spiritual telegram arriving while the body rested. Because of this, dreams were treated with reverence and careful attention. When someone awoke from a vivid or unusual dream, the first question wasn't just, "What did I dream?" but, "What is this dream telling me?" The rise of dream books. To help decipher these nocturnal messages, medieval scholars and clerics compiled books on dream meanings, early manuals that collected symbols, themes, and interpretations. These dream books, sometimes called Oneirocritica from the ancient Greek tradition, were widely circulated among the literate and even translated into vernacular languages for broader access. They ranged from simple lists of dream images and their meanings to complex treatises on spiritual and psychological interpretations. Common dream symbols were cataloged. Seeing a snake might indicate hidden enemies or sin. Dreaming of water could signal purification or danger. Encountering a dead person might mean a warning or a connection with the afterlife. These books often reflected the local culture, theology, and folklore, blending classical knowledge with Christian doctrine and folk beliefs. They became a kind of medieval dictionary of dreams, guiding people through the mysterious language of the night. For the educated elite, clergy, nobles, merchants, dream books were tools for self-reflection and spiritual insight. For peasants and townsfolk, these meanings were shared orally, passed from one generation to the next. The weight of bad dreams. Not all dreams were welcome visitors. In fact, bad dreams were often feared as ominous signs. They could stir anxiety, guilt, and dread. A nightmare wasn't just a bad night's sleep. It could be seen as evidence of spiritual trouble. Perhaps the dreamer was in sin, or perhaps a demon was trying to torment them. In some cases, bad dreams were interpreted as signs of impending illness, misfortune, or divine punishment. Because of this, a troubling dream might prompt a person to seek confession or penance. Going to a priest, confessing sins, and asking for prayers were common responses to a nightmare that lingered in the mind. For many, the fear that a bad dream could reflect or cause real-world harm made sleep a cautious act. The idea that sins and misdeeds could manifest in dreams kept moral discipline tightly woven into daily life. Lucid dreams and spiritual experiences. While many dreams were confusing or frightening, some medieval people reported experiences that would today be called lucid dreaming, moments of conscious awareness within a dream. Lucid dreams were often seen as spiritual experiences, opportunities for the soul to wander freely, engage with angels or demons, or glimpse hidden truths. Mystics and saints wrote extensively about visions and dreams where they felt consciously present, receiving divine revelations. These lucid moments were sometimes considered stages of spiritual awakening or divine favor. For instance, medieval mystics like Julian of Norwich or Hildegard of Bingen described visionary dreams that brought profound insight and comfort. Such dreams could inspire religious writings, personal transformations, or calls to action. Interpreting dreams in the community. Dreams didn't belong only to the individual. They often played a role in the broader community. If a noble or monarch reported a troubling or prophetic dream, it could influence political decisions or be taken as a sign to prepare for war, famine, or peace. Village elders, wise women, or clergy might be consulted to interpret a dream, especially if it seemed to foretell danger or blessing. These interpretations could guide agricultural choices, social relations, or spiritual practices. This communal sharing of dream knowledge reinforced social bonds, as well as the belief that dreams were a vital thread in the fabric of life. Dreams and the afterlife. Another dimension to medieval dream beliefs was the connection between dreams and the afterlife. Many thought that dreams could bring messages from deceased loved ones or hint at what awaited beyond death. Visions of departed souls might comfort the grieving or warn of unfinished business. Some believed that souls trapped in purgatory could send dreams pleading for prayers to help them find peace. This view made sleep a liminal space, a threshold where the living and the dead could meet briefly before dawn. Dreams and moral lessons. Dreams also served as moral lessons, both personal and communal. Medieval sermons and writings often included stories of people learning from their dreams, discovering sins they were blind to in waking life, or receiving guidance to change their ways. In this sense, dreams functioned as a kind of inner tribunal, testing the dreamer's virtue and faith. A nightmare might remind someone to repent. A pleasant vision might encourage charity or devotion. These moral dimensions made dreams part of the medieval ethical universe, reinforcing the belief that sleep was a spiritual journey, not just physical rest. Dreams in art and literature. Dreams inspired countless works of medieval art, literature, and folklore. From the vivid dream sequences in Dante's Divine Comedy to the allegorical visions of the Dream of the Rood, dreams were fertile ground for exploring spiritual themes, human fears, and hopes. These cultural works reflected and shaped common beliefs about dreams as messages from beyond, embedding them deeply in the medieval imagination. Scientific and philosophical views. While popular and religious beliefs dominated, medieval scholars also began to explore dreams from philosophical and proto-scientific perspectives. Figures like Aristotle and Avicenna were studied and debated, with theories about the nature of the soul, imagination, and sensory impressions influencing how dreams were understood. Yet even the most learned often maintained that dreams carried spiritual significance. The mind might reason and imagine, but the soul could also receive revelations during sleep. This blending of science, philosophy, and spirituality created a rich and complex view of dreams, unlike the purely psychological explanations common today. Legacy of medieval dream beliefs. Though modern science has demystified much of sleep and dreaming, the medieval view of dreams as portals to other worlds, divine messages, and moral guides still resonates in literature, folklore, and popular culture. We still speak of prophetic dreams or nightmares, and the human fascination with what dreams mean remains as strong as ever. Medieval dream beliefs remind us that sleep is more than rest. It is a profound, mysterious experience that touches on the deepest parts of our humanity, where the boundaries between body and soul, waking and dreaming, the natural and supernatural. 7. Children and bedtime in the Middle Ages. In the medieval world, childhood was a fragile, precious, and often perilous phase of life. The ways children were cared for at bedtime reveal much about the social structures, beliefs, and daily realities of the time. Far from the modern nursery routines filled with softly padded cribs and white noise machines, medieval children's nights were shaped by practical needs, superstition, family closeness, and the ever-present threat of unseen dangers. Swaddling, the medieval baby's first blanket. One of the most striking features of medieval infant care was swaddling. Unlike the free movement encouraged today, babies were tightly wrapped in long strips of linen or cloth, a practice that stretched back to antiquity and was thought to aid healthy growth and keep infants calm. The baby's arms and legs were snugly bound, sometimes almost immobile, often tied gently to a wooden cradle or crib to prevent flailing. The logic behind this was multifold. It was believed to help the baby's bones grow straight, protect from drafts, and make the infant feel secure, mimicking the confines of the womb. Swaddling also had practical benefits. It prevented babies from scratching their own faces or waking themselves with sudden movements. But it came with risks: poor circulation and overheating, dangers unknown or unconsidered at the time. Swaddled babies were typically laid in simple cradles, often wooden and rocked by hand, or baskets lined with straw. These cradles were portable, allowing caretakers to keep the child close during the day and night, moving easily from room to room or even outdoors. Family bed, the norm of shared sleep. Separate bedrooms were rare, even among the nobility. For most families, especially peasants, children shared beds with parents or siblings. Space was limited, and heat was precious in cold homes, so family members huddled together at night, bodies pressed close for warmth and comfort. This closeness was a necessity, but also a source of comfort and security for children, many of whom feared the dark and the spirits that folklore warned might roam at night. However, shared beds could be crowded, and beds often had thin or worn mattresses made from straw or feathers. The risk of accidental suffocation was not understood, but parents instinctively kept a watchful eye. Among wealthier families, separate beds for children might exist, but were still often placed in the same room. Privacy, as we understand it, was a luxury few could afford. Night terrors and the shadowy world of childhood fears. Medieval people understood well the unsettling nature of children's night terrors and bad dreams, but their explanations were wrapped in supernatural beliefs. When a child woke screaming in the night or seemed paralyzed by fear, it was often blamed on spirits, demons, or even witches. These night terrors were thought to be the result of evil entities trying to frighten or harm the vulnerable child. Caretakers might try to chase away these spirits using prayers, charms, or even the touch of a holy relic. In some regions, placing a protective amulet around the child's neck or hanging herbs near the bed was common practice. Teething troubles and magical remedies. One of the most painful and mysterious phases of childhood was teething. In a time before modern medicine, the swollen, irritated gums and fever that accompanied new teeth were alarming. Parents and midwives often resorted to charms and rituals to ease the discomfort or ward off evil influences thought to cause teething woes. For example, placing an object believed to hold protective power, like a piece of coral, a silver coin, or a cross, near the infant's bed was common. In some cases, more unusual remedies were used, such as rubbing herbs or honey on the gums, or reciting specific prayers and incantations said to soothe pain and protect from harm. The fear that teething could attract malevolent spirits or even cause the child's death was widespread, contributing to the anxiety surrounding this developmental milestone. Lullabies, songs of comfort and protection. Bedtime for children was often marked by lullabies, which were more than mere soothing songs. They were a form of prayer, protection, and teaching. These lullabies frequently included protective rhymes and blessings, invoking saints or God's watchful eye to guard the child's sleep. Lyrics might tell of angels watching over the child or banishing demons from the room. The rhythm and melody helped calm the baby or toddler, but the words were carefully chosen to provide spiritual armor against nightmares and evil spirits. Sometimes lullabies incorporated folk wisdom or moral lessons, embedding cultural values even in the moment of rest. The tradition of singing children to sleep was deeply embedded in medieval culture, a tender practice passed down from mother to daughter, father to son, ensuring that each generation learned how to meet the night with courage and hope. Children's nighttime fears, between imagination and reality. The medieval night was a fertile ground for fear in the minds of children. With darkness cast thick by the absence of electric light and the ever-present danger of wild animals, bandits, or disease, children learned early to respect the night's mysteries. Fear of monsters and spirits was common, reinforced by stories and local folklore. Parents used stories of spirits and demons not only to explain natural phenomena, but sometimes as behavioral tools, to keep children obedient or encourage them to stay close to home after dark. Children might also be told that spirits punished misbehavior by visiting nightmares or sickness, blending moral instruction with supernatural fear. At the same time, the natural human imagination filled the night with wonder. Dreams were often recounted in the morning, sometimes with a sense of awe and magic, reinforcing the belief that the night was a bridge to a world of spirits and possibilities. Caregiver vigilance, the night watch. Despite the dangers and fears, medieval caregivers took active roles at night. Parents, older siblings, and wet nurses often kept a vigil, ready to soothe cries, feed infants, or calm frightened children. In wealthier homes, a nursemaid might stay close to the child's bed, while in poorer households, older children might help watch over younger siblings. This nocturnal vigilance was essential, not just for comfort, but for survival. Infant mortality was high, and illnesses or dangers could strike at any hour. Keeping an ear open for a child's distress was as critical as feeding or clothing them. Death in childhood, a harsh reality. One sobering reality of medieval childhood was the ever-present risk of death. Child mortality rates were staggering compared to modern standards. Many children never lived past their first few years. Bedtime could be a poignant moment of fear, hope, and grief. Some families kept vigil beside a sick child through the night, praying for recovery. The fear of losing a child influenced many bedtime rituals, from prayers for protection to symbolic gestures meant to safeguard the child's soul. In this context, every sleep was both a moment of rest and a small victory against the harshness of life. Rituals for safe sleep, blessings, and holy objects. To protect children in their vulnerability, families often employed a variety of rituals and blessings. Before bedtime, parents might make the sign of the cross over the child's forehead, sprinkle holy water on the bed, or recite protective prayers. Holy objects such as crucifixes, rosaries, or saintly relics were sometimes placed near the child's bed, invoking divine guardianship. In some regions, special holy days or feast days included communal prayers for the health and safety of children, emphasizing the spiritual dimension of childhood sleep. Growing up and nighttime independence. As children grew older, their relationship with sleep and nighttime changed. Toddlers and young children transitioned from being constantly watched to gradually sleeping more independently. In wealthier families, children might eventually have their own beds or rooms. Among peasants, siblings often shared beds well into adolescence, yet the practices of prayers, protective charms, and storytelling often continued, weaving a continuous thread of tradition and care from infancy to adulthood. The enduring image of medieval childhood at night. The image of medieval children at bedtime is one of a world both harsh and tender, a mixture of practical care, superstition, family intimacy, and spiritual concern. The close quarters, the swaddling cloths, the shared warmth, the whispered prayers and lullabies, the ever-present fears of spirits and sickness, all speak of a time when night was both a refuge and a realm of mystery. Despite the dangers and challenges, medieval families nurtured their children with deep love and hope, using every available tool to keep them safe in the vulnerable hours of darkness. 8. Monks, matins, and midnight interruptions. The sacred rhythm of sleep. In the medieval world, monasteries stood apart as centers of spirituality, learning, and strict discipline. Within their stone walls, daily life was meticulously ordered according to religious devotion, and nowhere was this more evident than in the monastic sleep schedule. Unlike the more flexible or pragmatic sleeping habits of peasants, townsfolk, and nobles, monks practiced a regimented rhythm of sleep and prayer that shaped their nights and broke the natural flow of rest. This sacred schedule revealed a worldview where sleep was subordinated to spiritual vigilance, and nighttime was a realm not of rest, but of worship. The divine clock, monastic hours, and night vigil. Central to monastic life was the canonical hours, a set of prayer times spread throughout the day and night. Among these, matins, the midnight or very early morning office, played a crucial role in shaping monks' sleep. Matins was usually held around midnight or in the hours before dawn, requiring monks to rise from sleep and gather in the chapel for long, often solemn prayers and chants. Because the monastic day revolved around these fixed hours, sleep had to be divided accordingly, breaking up the night into segments punctuated by bell tolls and spiritual duties. Sleep in shifts. The broken night monks did not enjoy one continuous block of sleep. Instead, their night was split into periods, with a sleep cycle before and after matins. After evening prayers, Compline, monks would retire to their cells, where they might sleep for several hours. But their rest was regularly interrupted at midnight by the ringing of bells signaling matins. These midnight interruptions were not considered burdensome, but a necessary discipline, a chance to demonstrate vigilance and devotion by rising from sleep to praise God in the darkest hours. Following matins, some monks might return briefly to sleep, while others proceeded directly to the early morning prayers, lauds, continuing the cycle of worship. The role of the bells. The sound of the midnight bell was a powerful symbol in the monastery. Unlike the secular world, where bells might mark the hour for work or market, in monasteries, bells controlled the rhythm of life and sleep itself. The tolling was a summons, a sacred alarm clock echoing through stone corridors and cloisters, demanding presence in the chapel. This bell ringing was deliberate and loud enough to rouse even the deepest sleepers, reinforcing the idea that no rest could excuse absence from spiritual duty. Discipline over comfort. The monastic cell. Monastic cells, the tiny private rooms where monks slept, were Spartan, reflecting a vow of poverty and simplicity. Beds were plain wooden frames with thin straw or rush mattresses, often covered with simple woolen blankets. There was no luxury, no softness. Comfort was secondary to spiritual discipline. Some accounts suggest monks might sleep seated or in uncomfortable positions to avoid falling into deep, unproductive sleep, symbolically resisting bodily indulgence. This austere environment reinforced the idea that sleep was a necessary but subordinate part of monastic life, always interrupted by higher spiritual goals. Night vigil. The spiritual value of interrupted sleep. For monks, waking at midnight was not a punishment, but an honored tradition called the night vigil. This practice stemmed from biblical models of watchfulness, Jesus in Gethsemane, the vigilant virgins awaiting the bridegroom, and countless scriptural injunctions to stay awake spiritually. The night vigil was an act of solidarity with the divine, a demonstration of commitment to God's presence at all hours. Sleep was willingly sacrificed to uphold the sanctity of this spiritual watch, reflecting a worldview where the soul's awakening was more important than the body's rest. Monastic contrast, regulated versus secular sleep. This regimented monastic sleep starkly contrasted with the more fluid sleep patterns of the wider medieval population. While peasants and townsfolk arranged sleep around work, weather, and social needs, monks structured their nights around prayer schedules that left little room for flexibility. In secular life, sleep might be broken naturally by household chores, children's cries, or the demands of seasonal labor. But in monasteries, every interruption was preordained and purposeful, a carefully choreographed sacred dance. This difference highlights how medieval society was not monolithic, but contained diverse cultures of sleep shaped by social class, vocation, and spiritual values. Monks and the mystery of dreaming. Though the monastic emphasis was on waking devotion, monks were not immune to the mystery of dreams. In fact, dreams and visions among monks were often interpreted as spiritual revelations. Some monks recorded their dreams as part of their spiritual journals or hagiographies, seeing them as messages or warnings from God. The strict division of sleep could have intensified dream recall, as segmented rest is known to affect dreaming patterns. The physical toll of monastic sleep practices. While spiritually meaningful, this fragmented sleep likely took a physical toll on the monks' bodies. Waking repeatedly during the night, rising from warm beds to cold stone chapels, and praying in sometimes uncomfortable postures would have challenged physical endurance. yet many monks believed such sacrifices were necessary for spiritual health, often seeing bodily discomfort as a path to purification. The commitment to these rhythms underscored monastic ideals of self-denial and discipline, distinguishing monks from the secular world. Special practices for midnight prayer. To stay alert during these long nighttime prayers, monks developed techniques and rituals. Some monasteries kept small oil lamps or candles burning in the cells and chapels to aid wakefulness. Monks might engage in quiet reading, meditation, or physical stretching before matins to prepare their minds and bodies. Singing or chanting itself helped maintain focus and stave off drowsiness during lengthy vigils. Monastic community and sleep. Despite the solitude of their cells, monks were deeply connected through the communal rhythm of prayer. The midnight bell united them in a shared experience of interrupted sleep, reinforcing their identity as a spiritual family. The collective rising and gathering for matins created a powerful sense of purpose and belonging, making fragmented sleep part of a larger sacred mission. Evolution of monastic sleep practices. Over the centuries, monastic sleep patterns evolved with changes in monastic rules, architecture, and theology. Some orders emphasized longer night vigils, others allowed more sleep. The invention of mechanical clocks in the late Middle Ages began to change how time and sleep were regulated. Nevertheless, the core principle remained. Sleep was never an end in itself, but a means to support constant prayer and devotion. Monastic influence on broader medieval sleep culture. The monastic model of segmented sleep and nightly prayer did not remain confined to monasteries. It influenced the rhythms of church bells in towns, public life, and even secular customs, embedding the idea of sacred time divided into watches. The discipline of waking for prayer also contributed to the medieval concept of the first and second sleep, as people imitated the monastic practice of breaking night rest with periods of activity. 9. Urban nightlife, sleep in noisy medieval towns, finding rest amid chaos. Medieval towns were lively, chaotic places by day, and their energy didn't simply disappear after sunset. In fact, nighttime in medieval towns was far from quiet or peaceful. For those who lived within crowded city walls, sleep was often a challenge because of the constant background noise and activity that filled the streets well into the night. This segment peels back the curtain on what it was like to try to rest in the thick of medieval urban life, where sleep was often a battle against persistent sounds, restless neighbors, and the unpredictable rhythms of a pre-modern city that never fully slept. A city that never fully slept. Unlike the countryside, where silence and natural sounds might soothe one to sleep, medieval towns buzzed with constant nocturnal activity. Cobblestone streets echoed with the clatter of carts and horses, while inns, taverns, and alehouses spilled noise and laughter far into the night. Town markets might have closed, but the after-hours traffic of vendors, messengers, and late-shift workers kept many streets surprisingly lively. The very architecture of medieval towns, with narrow, winding alleys, tall wooden buildings, and open courtyards, amplified sound, turning simple noises into echoes that ricocheted through neighborhoods. The sounds that stirred the night. Several sources contributed to the persistent nocturnal soundscape that medieval townsfolk had to endure: shouting drunks and revelers. Taverns and inns were hotspots of activity. Patrons often staggered home late, sometimes brawling or singing loudly, disrupting neighbors' attempts at sleep. The medieval equivalent of last call could easily turn into a cacophony of shouting and clanging. Carts and wagons, even after dark, carts laden with goods, food, firewood, or barrels of ale, rattled over cobblestones. These carts were often pulled by horses or oxen whose hooves added to the din. The lack of modern suspension meant every bump and jolt resonated loudly. Town watchmen and night guards. Official night watchmen patrolled the streets, calling out warnings, announcing the hours, or alerting citizens to fires or crimes. Their loud cries and the ringing of bells acted as both protection and an interruption to sleep. Street vendors and messengers. Some sellers operated late into the night, hawking goods like fish or bread to accommodate early risers or late workers. Messengers and town criers also moved through the streets, sharing urgent news or proclamations. Animals roaming the streets. Medieval towns had no sanitation systems like modern cities. Stray dogs, cats, rats, and even pigs roamed freely, rummaging through garbage piles, barking, fighting, or making disturbing noises that kept sleepers uneasy. Shared living spaces and thin walls. Most urban residents lived in cramped, closely packed homes or tenement buildings where walls and floors offered little sound insulation. Thin wooden or wattle and daub walls meant that the noise of a neighbor's argument, a child's cry, or a tavern's late-night revelry easily penetrated through homes. In many cases, families and multiple generations shared small rooms, making it impossible to avoid disturbances from within the household itself. Inns and boarding houses were particularly noisy, filled with travelers, merchants, and sailors who were often far less concerned about quiet hours than locals. The challenge of securing privacy and quiet. In medieval towns, the idea of quiet private sleep was a luxury. People accepted that noise was part of urban living and developed various strategies to cope. Windows were often shuttered or covered with cloth to block noise as well as light, though the thin construction of many windows still allowed sound to seep through. Some wealthier townsfolk might retreat to inner chambers away from street-facing rooms, hoping for a bit more quiet. But for many, the best they could do was learn to tune out the constant background noise or use physical barriers like thick bedding and earplugs made from soft materials, though these were rare. Adaptive sleep patterns in the city. Because of this noise, many urban dwellers adapted their sleep patterns to fit the realities of city life. Some might take short naps during the day when streets were quieter or when work allowed, compensating for poor or interrupted nighttime sleep. Others developed a heightened tolerance for noise, much like modern city dwellers who sleep through sirens or traffic. The concept of a single, uninterrupted 8-hour sleep was foreign to most townspeople. Instead, sleep was often fragmented, broken, and unpredictable. Fear and danger. Amplified at night, medieval towns could be dangerous places after dark, and this insecurity added to the unrest of sleep. The threat of thieves, muggers, and violent criminals prowling the streets was real. Town walls and guards offered some protection, but crime was common enough to keep people on edge. Stray animals might seem benign, but could also carry disease or attack, adding to the general sense of unease. This fear meant many residents took extra precautions, locking doors with heavy wooden bolts, keeping weapons nearby, or sleeping in groups for safety. Such vigilance meant sleep was often light and easily disturbed, especially by unfamiliar sounds. Role of the night watch. To maintain some order, towns employed night watchmen who patrolled and called out warnings or the time. These watchmen were often armed and tasked with deterring crime and fires. While their presence was reassuring to some, their loud calls and bell ringing added to the urban nocturnal soundscape. In fact, their cries could wake whole neighborhoods, serving as a sort of communal alarm system that, while disruptive, was essential for safety. Lighting and its impact on sleep. Unlike rural areas where natural darkness reigned, towns were somewhat illuminated at night. Torches, lanterns, and street fires lit key thoroughfares. Though helpful for safety, this artificial light sometimes disturbed the natural cues that governed sleep cycles. The flickering, uneven light created shadows and movement that could startle sleepers. Light also attracted nocturnal creatures and encouraged nighttime activity in public spaces, further complicating the possibility of a peaceful night's rest. Cultural attitudes toward night noise. Medieval urban residents often accepted nocturnal noise as an inevitable part of the city's lively character. chroniclers and poets sometimes noted the vibrant night sounds with a mix of amusement and frustration. Sleep disruptions were rarely complained about publicly. Instead, they were woven into daily life and acknowledged as one more hardship of urban living. This acceptance also reflected a communal understanding that night was a shared space, not a private one. Social and economic factors. Who suffered most from the noisy urban nights? Typically, the poor and working-class residents who lived in crowded quarters closest to taverns and markets. Wealthier citizens could afford homes deeper in quieter districts or could retreat to countryside estates for more restful nights. Artisans, laborers, and merchants had to manage sleep around their work hours and neighborhood noise. This uneven impact on sleep mirrored broader social inequalities in medieval towns, medieval remedies, and coping mechanisms. Some medieval people sought folk remedies to help them sleep despite noise. Herbs like lavender, valerian, or chamomile might be used to promote relaxation. Incense or smoldering herbs were burned to mask unpleasant smells and create a calming atmosphere. Others relied on religious prayers and rituals before sleep to ward off nightmares or to ask for protection through the restless night. Earplugs as we know them didn't exist, but some may have used soft cloths or wads of wool to muffle sound. The last refuge, the bed as sanctuary. Despite the chaos outside, the bed itself was often seen as a sanctuary. People piled thick blankets and furs to muffle sound and provide comfort against the cold. Some families slept huddled together to create warmth and mutual reassurance. The bed became a place not only for physical rest, but for psychological retreat from the noisy, unpredictable world just beyond the walls. Legacy, urban noise, and the evolution of sleep. The noisy, restless nights of medieval townsfolk offer a fascinating window into how urban environments shape sleep. Even today, city dwellers confront similar challenges. Sirens, traffic, neighbors, and nightlife noise all impact rest. Medieval townspeople's adaptations to noise, fear, and constant activity remind us that sleep is a flexible, culturally embedded behavior, one that shifts according to place, time, and social conditions. 10. Sleeping with the enemy. Inns, pilgrims, and strangers. The intimate challenge of medieval hospitality. When traveling in medieval times, finding a place to sleep was rarely about comfort or privacy. It was about survival. Inns, the primary lodging options for most travelers and pilgrims, offered a mix of hospitality, necessity, and communal inconvenience. For many, sleeping under the same roof, and sometimes the same blanket, with strangers was an unavoidable reality. This segment dives deep into the strange, often uncomfortable world of medieval inns and communal lodging, where personal space was a luxury few could afford, and sharing beds was more than a social awkwardness. It was a survival tactic shaped by economic, social, and cultural forces. The reality of medieval inns, crowded, noisy, and shared. Unlike the private hotel rooms of today, medieval inns were crowded hubs where space was at a premium. For the average traveler, merchants, pilgrims, messengers, or wandering laborers, the inn was often the only option for rest during long journeys. But inns were not designed with individual privacy in mind. The concept of a private bedroom for a single guest was mostly reserved for the very wealthy or nobility. Instead, common rooms were loud, bustling, and crowded with a mix of locals and travelers. Guests ate, drank, and slept in shared spaces, sometimes all under one roof, sometimes even in the same room. Sharing beds was the norm. One of the most startling aspects of medieval inn life was the common practice of sharing beds. Inns often had fewer beds than guests, forcing strangers to double up in a single bed. This was not only economical, but also practical, given the costs and scarcity of beds. The practice might seem strange or uncomfortable from a modern perspective, but for medieval travelers, it was a necessity. A bed meant warmth and protection from cold, damp floors, and sometimes from unsavory vermin. The phrase "sleeping with the enemy" was sometimes joked about because sharing a bed with a stranger could feel risky or awkward. The enemy here could be anyone from a suspicious fellow traveler to a potential thief. Pilgrimages and communal sleeping pilgrimages to holy sites like Canterbury or Santiago de Compostela were major travel events during the medieval period. Thousands of pilgrims flocked to these sacred destinations, creating enormous demand for lodging. Pilgrim hostels, often run by religious orders or charities, offered communal dormitory-style sleeping arrangements. Rows of beds lined halls, and sometimes no beds were provided at all. Pilgrims simply slept on straw-filled mattresses on the floor. Privacy was virtually non-existent, and pilgrims had to tolerate the snoring, coughing, and restless movements of dozens of others in the same room. This close proximity sometimes fostered camaraderie, but could also lead to tension, especially when pilgrims were exhausted and irritable after long days on the road. Hot bedding, the shifting practice of renting beds by the hour. Another bizarre practice common in medieval inns was hot bedding. Because of high demand and limited beds, inns sometimes rented out beds in shifts. A traveler who arrived late at night might find their bed already occupied by someone who slept there earlier. This practice involved quick turnover of beds, sometimes within hours, forcing guests to share bedding that was often still warm from a previous occupant. The hot bed was seen as efficient for innkeepers but unpleasant for guests, as it raised hygiene issues and discomfort. The lack of clean linen and the sharing of mattresses increased the spread of pests like fleas and lice. Hygiene and the risks of shared. Sleeping. Sleeping in close quarters with strangers presented significant health and hygiene challenges. Medieval understanding of germs and disease was limited, so the risks of catching illnesses from bedfellows were high. Bedding was rarely washed regularly. Straw mattresses and feather beds were breeding grounds for lice, fleas, and mites. The sharing of blankets and sheets meant parasites could easily transfer from one person to another. Despite these risks, many travelers accepted the conditions because the alternative was often sleeping outside, exposed to cold, rain, and danger. Some inns had basic cleaning rituals, beating out bedding in the morning, airing mattresses, but these efforts were insufficient by modern standards. Social hierarchies. Within the inn, social class still mattered greatly in medieval inns, even within the cramped and communal sleeping arrangements. Wealthier guests sometimes managed to secure private rooms or separate beds, though these were rare and costly. Middle-class merchants or minor nobility might pay extra for more comfort or some degree of privacy. The poorest travelers, laborers, peasants, or lower-status pilgrims had little choice but to accept communal beds or even sleep on the floor. This hierarchy reflected the broader social stratification of medieval society, but was compressed within the tight walls of the inn. Psychological and emotional effects of communal sleeping beyond the physical discomfort and health risks. Sharing sleeping space with strangers had psychological effects. Sleep is a vulnerable state, and trusting strangers not to steal, harm, or disrupt rest was a gamble. Many travelers reported feeling anxious or uneasy, especially in unfamiliar inns where the reputation was unknown. The presence of strangers could cause restlessness, difficulty falling asleep, or frequent waking. In some cases, stories of thefts or attacks during the night spread, increasing wariness. Despite these fears, communal sleeping also offered a sense of protection in numbers. There was safety in being among others, rather than alone in an isolated location. Cultural norms and hospitality. Hospitality was a major cultural value in medieval Europe, especially for pilgrims and travelers. Religious and secular codes emphasized the duty to provide shelter and food to strangers. Inns operated within this framework, and despite cramped and uncomfortable conditions, they fulfilled a vital social role. The acceptance of shared beds was partly rooted in this culture of communal hospitality and mutual dependence. Strangers became temporary companions, sharing stories, food, and even warmth through the night. This fostered a unique, if uneasy, social dynamic within inns and pilgrim hostels. Gender and sleeping arrangements. Gender played a significant role in how sleeping arrangements were managed. Men and women typically slept separately, though economic constraints sometimes made this difficult. In inns, men might share rooms or beds, while women, especially single women, might be lodged together or in more secure quarters to protect against harassment. Some inns employed female attendants or matrons to oversee female guests and maintain order. In pilgrim hostels, gender segregation was more rigorously enforced by religious authorities, though overcrowding sometimes compromised these boundaries. Seasonal and geographic variations. Sleeping conditions in inns also varied depending on the region and season. In colder climates or winter months, warmth was a priority, so beds might be shared even more frequently to conserve heat. In warmer southern regions, windows might be left open and bedding was lighter, slightly improving comfort. Coastal towns and major trade centers often had more inns with better facilities, catering to wealthier merchants and travelers. Rural inns or way stations along pilgrimage routes were simpler, more crowded, and less hygienic. Legends, tales, and inns in popular imagination. Medieval literature and folklore often depicted inns as places of intrigue, danger, and moral testing. Tales of thieves lurking in common rooms, dishonest innkeepers, or travelers betrayed by bedfellows circulated widely. Such stories reinforced wariness about sharing sleeping quarters and underscored inns' reputation as places where one had to be cautious. Yet inns were also settings for social interaction, storytelling, and forming unexpected friendships. This dual image, both refuge and risk, captured the complicated reality of medieval communal sleeping. The role of the innkeeper. The innkeeper was a crucial figure in managing the chaos of communal sleeping. Responsible for assigning beds, collecting payment, and maintaining some order, the innkeeper often wielded significant power. Some were known for their hospitality and fairness, others for greed or cruelty. Guests depended on the innkeeper's reputation and management to ensure a reasonably safe and comfortable night. 11th, seasonal sleep changes and solar patterns, living by the rhythm of nature. In the medieval world, people's daily lives were intimately tied to the cycles of nature. Without modern artificial lighting, climate control, or standardized work hours, sleep patterns naturally shifted with the seasons and the rising and setting of the sun. The changing length of days and nights, combined with environmental challenges, shaped how medieval people approached rest in ways that might feel foreign to our modern, clock-driven lives. This segment explores the fascinating and complex ways in which seasonal changes and solar rhythms influenced sleep habits, showing how humans adapted their sleep schedules organically to the natural world around them. Winter, the season of extended rest. When winter arrived, bringing long nights and cold weather, medieval people naturally spent more time sleeping. It wasn't unusual for people to sleep up to 14 hours during the darkest months. This extended rest was not just a matter of choice, but a practical adaptation to several factors. Firstly, the absence of sunlight played a crucial role. In winter, the sun would set early, sometimes as soon as mid-afternoon, plunging communities into darkness by late afternoon. Since artificial lighting was costly and limited to candles, rushlights, or oil lamps, all of which burned dimly and required valuable resources, most people avoided staying up long after dusk. Secondly, cold temperatures discouraged activity and kept people indoors. Without central heating or efficient insulation, the chill seeped into homes, and staying in bed was one of the best ways to conserve body heat. Sleeping longer during winter also aligned with the natural circadian rhythm influenced by darkness. The brain produces more melatonin, the hormone that promotes sleep, when nights are longer. Medieval people, living close to the land, would have experienced these shifts more acutely than modern urban dwellers. Summer, shorter sleep and early rising. In contrast, summer brought long daylight hours, sometimes up to 16 or 18 hours of sunlight in northern regions. As a result, sleep was often shorter and fragmented, dictated by the demands of agricultural labor and household chores. With sunrise occurring very early, sometimes before 4 or 5 a.m., medieval people would rise with the sun even if still feeling groggy. The extended daylight meant more time to work in the fields, tend animals, and perform outdoor tasks vital to survival. Additionally, summer nights were often too short or bright to allow long, uninterrupted sleep. The natural light streaming through windows or gaps in shutters served as a biological alarm clock, nudging people awake before they might have naturally wanted to get up. People might have also taken short naps or rested intermittently during the day, balancing the shorter nocturnal sleep with daytime breaks, a flexible approach adapted to seasonal work rhythms. Bedtime aligned with sunset candlelight was a precious commodity in medieval times. Each candle required valuable resources. Beeswax was expensive, and tallow candles burned poorly and smelled bad. Because of this, people generally went to bed soon after sunset. The setting sun marked a natural cutoff point for daily activities. Even in wealthier households with access to more lighting, staying awake much beyond dark was uncommon and often impractical. The daily rhythm was built around the solar cycle: rise with dawn, work by daylight, and rest when darkness fell. This created a strong communal pattern, with villages and towns growing quiet soon after sunset as households retreated indoors and went to sleep. Nocturnal animals and seasonal disturbances. The natural world also contributed to the variability of medieval sleep, especially through the presence of nocturnal animals and seasonal weather phenomena. Wolves, foxes, owls, and other night-active creatures roamed forests and countryside, sometimes causing disturbances that could rouse sleepers. In rural areas, the sounds of animals, whether domestic or wild, were part of the nocturnal soundscape. Roosters crowing before dawn, dogs barking at passing travelers, or even barnyard animals shifting in their pens all influenced when and how deeply people slept. Storms, which were common and often intense, particularly during transitional seasons, also disrupted sleep. Heavy rain, thunder, and fierce winds would shake poorly insulated homes and stir anxiety, making restful sleep difficult. Medieval people had to develop a tolerance for these natural interruptions, often adapting by adjusting their sleep cycles or incorporating periods of wakefulness during the night. Rising with the sun. The natural alarm clock. One of the most consistent behaviors across seasons was the habit of rising with the first light of dawn. Even if they were still tired or not fully rested, medieval people accepted sunrise as the natural start of the day. This habit was reinforced by the lack of alternative lighting and the social structure of agrarian life, which demanded early rising for chores and work. This also meant that, especially during the summer, people might have gotten less sleep than modern health recommendations suggest, yet their bodies adapted to this natural cycle. The absence of artificial noise pollution meant that birdsong, morning light, and household sounds served as reliable signals for waking. Seasonal work dictates sleep patterns. Beyond the light and darkness, the seasonal workload deeply influenced sleep schedules. During planting and harvest seasons, sleep was often sacrificed to complete critical agricultural tasks. Farmers would rise before dawn to make the most of daylight, sometimes returning home exhausted and falling into deep but shorter sleep. Winter, by contrast, was a time of relative rest and hibernation for many rural workers, which allowed for longer sleep and more recovery. Craftsmen and townsfolk, whose work was less tied to daylight, still adapted their schedules around seasonal fairs, festivals, and market days. The role of solar patterns in health and mood. Living so closely attuned to natural light cycles had effects on medieval people's health and emotional well-being. In winter months, the long darkness and extended sleep could cause lethargy and a low mood, something similar to what modern science calls seasonal affective disorder, SAD. On the other hand, summer's long, bright days encouraged productivity, socialization, and more active lifestyles. This close relationship between sleep, light, and mood meant that medieval people experienced the rhythms of nature not only physically, but emotionally and spiritually. Sleep adaptations. Before and after seasonal changes. Medieval people were highly attuned to the transitions between seasons, adjusting their sleep routines gradually. As days lengthened in spring, people began rising earlier, reducing their nighttime sleep. Conversely, as autumn approached and nights grew longer, they extended their time in bed. These shifts were not abrupt, but flowed with the environment's subtle changes, demonstrating a fluid, dynamic approach to sleep that modern rigid schedules often overlook. Lack of clocks. Time measured by nature. Because mechanical clocks were rare and often inaccurate, people measured time by natural indicators: the sun's position, the crowing of roosters, the ringing of church bells. This reliance on solar and natural cues shaped sleep timing in a way that made it inherently seasonal. Medieval sleep was not regimented by hours on a clock, but by the gradual fading and return of light. Implications for modern understanding of sleep. Understanding these seasonal sleep habits reveals a very different human relationship to rest than what most experience today. Medieval people's sleep was flexible, tied to environment, economy, and social needs rather than strict schedules. It shows how deeply biology and environment interact, offering insight into how modern lifestyles, detached from natural rhythms, might contribute to widespread sleep problems. 12. Sleep and the weather. How medieval people endured nature's whims. In medieval times, the weather wasn't just a background element. It was a living force that influenced every aspect of life, including sleep. Without modern heating, weather forecasts, or sturdy insulation, people were at the mercy of the climate in ways that shaped their nights deeply. From the biting cold of winter to the damp chill of rainy days, the medieval sleeping experience was inseparable from the environment. This section delves into the intimate and often harsh relationship between weather and sleep in the Middle Ages, revealing how climate, home construction, and seasonal shifts dictated the comfort or discomfort of rest and how people coped with those challenges. The brutal cold, winter's grip on sleep. Winter nights in medieval Europe could be long and brutally cold, especially in northern or mountainous regions. Without central heating or well-insulated walls, keeping warm was the foremost concern at bedtime. Homes were often built from stone or timber, materials that absorbed cold during the day and released it slowly overnight, creating an indoor chill that seeped into bedding and bones alike. People layered themselves with heavy woolen clothing and blankets, but even that wasn't always enough. The cold would often wake sleepers or cause restless tossing as body heat struggled to overcome the ambient chill. To combat this, medieval households employed ingenious heating aids such as bed warmers, metal pans filled with hot embers slid under the covers, or hot stones wrapped in cloth placed at the foot of the bed. Despite these efforts, nights spent shivering and battling cold were common, especially for peasants whose homes were draftier and less protected. Dampness, the enemy of comfort. Dampness was another major factor that ruined sleep quality. Thatched roofs, common in rural homes, were prone to leaks, especially during heavy rains or snowmelts. Walls made of wood or wattle and daub, a mix of sticks, mud, and straw, absorbed moisture and often allowed cold drafts to creep through. Humidity indoors rose during rainy seasons or when cooking fires released steam, contributing to a clammy atmosphere that made sleeping uncomfortable. People were aware of the dangers posed by dampness, both for comfort and health. They understood that sleeping in a cold, damp bed could worsen joint pains, rheumatism, and other ailments believed to be linked to moisture and cold exposure. Elderly individuals and children were particularly vulnerable. Rain sounds, comfort or aggravation? The sound of rain on thatched roofs was an omnipresent feature of medieval nights, especially during autumn and spring. For some, the steady pitter-patter of rain was a natural lullaby, a soothing white noise that helped lull them to sleep. But for others, particularly those living in homes with leaky roofs, rain could mean worry and discomfort, as drips and leaks disturbed sleep or even soaked bedding. Repairing roofs was a constant challenge for rural families, and during heavy or prolonged rainstorms, the fear of damage and worsening dampness added a psychological weight to the physical inconvenience. Wind and drafts. Invisible intruders. Unlike modern homes sealed against the elements, medieval houses were drafty by nature. Gaps between logs, cracks in stone walls, and loose window shutters all allowed cold wind to invade interiors. Even a slight breeze at night could cut through clothing and blankets, causing sudden chills that woke sleepers or made it difficult to fall asleep. In coastal or exposed areas, howling winds created eerie night sounds, unsettling many and sometimes giving rise to folk tales about spirits or winds as messengers. Medieval people often placed heavy curtains or tapestries near beds or windows to reduce drafts, but these measures were rarely fully effective. Snow, silent. Yet severe snowfall brought its own unique challenges. While snow blanketed the ground in insulating white, keeping some warmth beneath it, heavy snowstorms could isolate families, cut off travel, and increase indoor dampness as melting snow leaked into walls and floors. Sleeping in freezing conditions meant dealing with wet clothes or bedding, and without the ability to dry them easily, people sometimes resorted to sleeping in damp garments. The snow could also quiet the outside world, muffling noises and creating a strangely silent atmosphere that could be both calming and unnerving. Heat and humidity. Summer night struggles. Though often overshadowed by the cold, summer nights brought their own discomforts. Many medieval homes were poorly ventilated, meaning that during heat waves, rooms became stifling by nightfall. Excessive warmth and humidity caused sweating, restlessness, and dehydration. In towns, the close proximity of buildings and people magnified heat retention and unpleasant smells, further disturbing sleep. People tried to open windows or sleep outdoors when possible, but insects, noise, and security concerns limited these options. Storms and thunder. Nighttime dramas. Storms were regular features of medieval weather, and their nighttime arrival could be dramatic. Thunderclaps, lightning flashes, and driving rain or hail disturbed even the deepest sleepers. For medieval people, these storms were often laden with spiritual or superstitious meaning, seen as omens or punishments from divine forces. Sleeping through a storm was both a physical and psychological challenge. The fear of damage to property or livestock, combined with the sensory assault of noise and flashes, made restful sleep elusive. Adaptations to weather challenges. Despite these many weather-related hardships, medieval people developed strategies and cultural practices to cope. They crafted homes and beds to maximize warmth, using heavy fabrics, layering bedding, and sometimes huddling together in shared beds for mutual warmth. Community cooperation was essential in extreme weather. Neighbors might check on each other during storms or help repair damaged roofs. People also paid close attention to weather patterns as signs for planting, harvest, and daily activity planning, understanding that sleep and rest had to be balanced against urgent labor needs during adverse conditions. Clothing and bedding. Weather-responsive choices. Medieval sleepwear and bedding choices were closely linked to the weather. Woolen garments were preferred in cold seasons, linen lighter and cooler in summer. Feathers and straw were common mattress materials, with heavier feather beds reserved for wealthier individuals. Blankets and quilts were layered in winter, but often removed in warmer months. Some households kept separate bedding for cold and warm seasons, a practice passed down through generations. Psychological effects of weather on sleep. The weather's impact on sleep was not purely physical. Endless cold, damp, or noisy nights could erode morale, increase anxiety, and contribute to what modern psychology might call insomnia. long stretches of bad weather were associated with melancholy or the winter blues. Conversely, a mild night, clear skies, or the calming sound of gentle rain could promote restful sleep and pleasant dreams. Medieval people integrated these experiences into their spiritual and cultural life, using prayers, charms, or rituals to invoke good sleep during difficult weather. The cycle of preparation and anticipation. Sleep was part of a daily cycle that included preparing for the coming weather. Before bedtime, medieval people might inspect windows and doors for drafts, place extra coverings on beds, or set warming stones. In some regions, seasonal rituals marked the transition into winter or summer sleep habits, celebrating or lamenting the changing conditions. Anticipating a cold night meant adjusting behavior, going to bed earlier, eating warming foods, or gathering extra firewood. This ongoing cycle of preparation emphasized how closely intertwined sleep and weather truly were. 13. Sleepwalking and possession. At night, medieval fears and folklore. In medieval Europe, the boundary between the natural and supernatural was thin, especially when it came to sleep. What modern science might call sleepwalking or other parasomnias was interpreted through the lens of religious belief, superstition, and deep-rooted fears about the soul's vulnerability at night. Sleepwalking wasn't just a medical curiosity or odd behavior. It was often seen as evidence of spiritual possession, witchcraft, or demonic interference. This perception shaped how people treated those who exhibited unusual nighttime behaviors, and it influenced both private practices and public reactions. Sleepwalking, as witchcraft and demonic influence medieval societies had limited understanding of neurological phenomena, like sleepwalking or night terrors. People observed that some individuals, children, the sick, or even adults, would rise in the night, perform unusual actions, or wander outdoors without apparent awareness. Instead of attributing this to a sleep disorder, many believed these episodes were caused by evil forces or witches manipulating the sleeper's body or soul. Sleepwalking could be seen as a form of night possession, where demons or spirits temporarily took control of a person's body to perform mischief or evil deeds. This belief fed into wider fears about witchcraft, possession, and the spiritual dangers lurking after dark. Accusations could arise from innocent behaviors, especially in communities where fear of witchcraft was high and suspicion could have deadly consequences. The night journey or soul flight in folklore across Europe, folklore abounded with stories of night journeys. The idea that a person's soul or spirit left the body during sleep to roam distant places. This concept was connected to sleepwalking, but also to shamanistic and pagan beliefs that predated Christianity. In some regions, people believed that during sleepwalking, the soul traveled to otherworldly realms, engaged in battles with spirits, or attended mystical gatherings like witches' sabbaths. The sleeper's body, meanwhile, moved aimlessly or performed automatic actions, while the real self was elsewhere on a spiritual journey. This idea added layers of mystery and fear to sleepwalking, transforming it from a strange bodily phenomenon into a cosmic, spiritual event. Protective measures. Tying down the sleepwalker. Because of the dangers believed to accompany sleepwalking, both to the individual and to the community, people developed practical and ritualistic responses. One widespread practice was physically restraining the sleepwalker to prevent harm. Family members or caregivers might tie the sleeper to the bedposts with ropes or cords, ensuring they would not rise and wander into dangerous situations. In some cases, beds were placed in rooms with locked or barred doors, or the windows were secured to prevent escape. These physical restraints reflected both concern for safety and a belief that the soul or demon could be trapped or restrained in this way. Sleepwalking as a public concern. Fear and stigma. Sleepwalking was not always treated as a private family matter. In tightly knit medieval communities, odd behaviors at night could become public issues. Fear of possession or witchcraft meant that sleepwalkers were sometimes regarded with suspicion or fear by neighbors. They might be ostracized or their behavior could be cited as proof of heresy or diabolical involvement. Public officials, clergy, or healers might be called upon to intervene through prayer, exorcism, or other religious rites aimed at expelling demons or breaking spells. In some extreme cases, accusations of witchcraft connected to nighttime behaviors led to trials or punishments. Religious interpretations and clerical responses. The Church played a critical role in shaping beliefs about sleepwalking and nighttime possession. Sleepwalking was often framed as a spiritual affliction or a test of faith. Priests might see it as evidence of sin, temptation, or a warning from God. To counteract it, religious interventions included prayers, blessings, and exorcisms aimed at freeing the afflicted from demonic influence. Holy water, relics, or blessed objects were placed near beds or worn by sleepers as protection. Sometimes sufferers were encouraged to confess sins or undertake penance to purify their souls. These spiritual remedies were combined with folk practices, creating a complex tapestry of medieval approaches to the phenomenon. Sleepwalking and nightmares. Linked mysteries. Sleepwalking was often accompanied by terrifying nightmares or visions. Medieval people believed that bad dreams could signal spiritual attack or that the sleeper was vulnerable to evil forces during moments of unconsciousness. Nightmares were sometimes thought to be caused by incubi or succubi, malevolent spirits that preyed on sleepers. Sleepwalking episodes could therefore be part of a broader syndrome of nocturnal spiritual disturbance, further reinforcing fear and the need for protective rituals. Gender and sleepwalking. Women in the spotlight. Women were disproportionately associated with sleepwalking and nocturnal possession in medieval folklore. This was partly due to prevailing social attitudes that linked women with vulnerability to sin and demonic influence. Sleepwalking women might be suspected of secret nighttime trysts with spirits or demons, or of attending witches' gatherings while their bodies moved in trance-like states. This gendered suspicion added to the stigma and danger, especially during witch hunts or inquisitions. Children and sleepwalking. Vulnerable souls. Children were often seen as especially vulnerable to spiritual attacks during sleep. Their developing minds and bodies were believed to be more susceptible to possession or interference by spirits. Sleepwalking in children was taken very seriously, and parents might seek religious help, employ protective charms, or physically restrain their children at night. Stories of children sleepwalking into dangerous places or interacting with supernatural beings were common in folklore. Such tales reinforced the idea that sleepwalking was more than a harmless oddity. It was a symptom of a fragile soul at risk. Folk remedies and charms beyond religious rituals. Many folk remedies were aimed at preventing or curing sleepwalking and possession. These included hanging protective herbs like sage, rue, or vervain near the bed, placing iron objects such as horseshoes or nails under pillows or over doors believed to ward off evil spirits, using salt sprinkled around sleeping areas as a purifier and barrier, reciting specific prayers or incantations before bedtime, burning certain fragrant woods or herbs to cleanse the air. Such practices blended superstition, herbal knowledge, and religious belief into nightly routines designed to secure peaceful, safe sleep. Cultural legacy. Sleepwalking in medieval stories. Medieval literature and folklore are rich with stories featuring sleepwalking as a mysterious and often ominous occurrence. Tales of nobles caught sleepwalking in forbidden places or peasants wandering into enchanted forests were popular. These stories often conveyed moral or spiritual lessons about vigilance, the dangers of sin, or the thin line between this world and the next. Sleepwalking was both a narrative device and a reflection of genuine societal anxieties about nighttime vulnerability. Modern perspective. Echoes of medieval fear. While today we understand sleepwalking as a neurological condition, the medieval interpretation reveals much about the cultural and spiritual fabric of the time. Their fear and attempts at control underscore a universal human concern: the loss of control over oneself during sleep, and the fear of what happens when consciousness fades. The medieval experience shows us how natural phenomena are interpreted through cultural lenses, influenced by the era's knowledge, beliefs, and fears. 14. Castle bedrooms. Glamorous but grim. When we imagine medieval castles, the mind often pictures grand halls, towering battlements, and sumptuous chambers fit for kings and queens. Castle bedrooms in particular evoke images of luxury, rich tapestries, massive wooden beds, and heavy velvet curtains. But beneath this glamorous veneer, life in a castle bedroom was often harsh, uncomfortable, and fraught with practical challenges. The cold reality of stone walls. One of the defining features of castle bedrooms was their massive stone construction. Thick stone walls formed the very foundation of castles, providing defense against invaders and fireproofing against disasters. However, these same stone walls created an environment that was notoriously cold and damp. Stone is an excellent heat conductor, meaning it absorbed and radiated the chilly air of the outdoors. Without modern insulation or central heating, castle chambers often felt like icy caves in autumn and winter. The cold could seep through even the thickest walls, making it a constant battle to keep warm, no matter how many layers of clothing or bedding were used. Despite their wealth, nobility often had to rely on fireplaces to add some warmth, but these were far from perfect. Smoke was difficult to manage, chimneys were rudimentary, and the fire could quickly die down, leaving the room frigid overnight. Echoes in the chamber's castle bedrooms were typically large and sparsely furnished by today's standards. The expansive, high-ceilinged rooms created a vast echo, amplifying even the softest sounds, the crackling of embers, the rustling of sheets, or footsteps on stone floors. This echoing quality sometimes made the castle feel eerie and even unsettling at night. In the dim candlelight, sounds carried further, creating an atmosphere where every noise seemed magnified and mysterious. This could heighten the senses of castle dwellers, making restful sleep more difficult. The unwanted guests: lice, fleas, and rats. Though castles were homes to the wealthy and powerful, they were not immune to the everyday pests that plagued medieval life. Lice and fleas were common nuisances, thriving in the thick fabrics of tapestries, bedding, and clothing. Bedding was often made from straw-filled mattresses covered with wool or linen sheets, and although noble families might afford finer linens, these materials still offered a haven for parasites. No matter how carefully beds were maintained, the constant warmth and proximity of people made beds prime spots for lice and fleas to infest. Rats and mice, attracted by food stores and waste, were also persistent problems. Castles stored provisions in large quantities, and the presence of vermin was a continuous battle. These rodents were not only a nuisance, but also carried diseases, adding to the health risks faced by castle residents. Ornate beds, status symbols, and practical necessities. Despite the grim realities of cold, pests, and echoes, castle bedrooms were adorned with impressive and ornate beds that served both as functional furniture and powerful status symbols. These beds were often crafted from heavy oak or other durable woods and featured intricate carvings and detailed designs on headboards and posts. The grandeur of the bed was a visible indicator of the occupant's wealth, rank, and power. Beds could be elevated on platforms or surrounded by canopies and curtains, which had multiple purposes. The heavy curtains helped to retain some warmth within the bed area, shielding sleepers from drafts and cold air circulating in the room. Curtains also offered privacy in shared chambers and reduced noise to some extent. Bedding itself included layers of blankets, furs, and feather mattresses when available, though even the nobility's mattresses could be rough by modern standards. Sleep in shifts. The presence of guards. Safety was paramount in castles, especially for the nobility. Because castles were often targets for sieges, raids, or assassinations, nighttime security was a constant concern. Unlike modern private bedrooms, noble chambers were rarely locked away from the watchful eyes of guards. These guards would take turns standing watch in corridors, antechambers, and sometimes even within the sleeping quarters themselves. Sleeping in shifts was a common practice among the guards, and sometimes even the noble family, who might rise or be awakened at intervals for prayers to check for danger or attend to emergencies. This disrupted sleep pattern was part of castle life and meant that uninterrupted rest was a luxury rarely enjoyed. Shared chambers and privacy limitations. While today's idea of a bedroom is a private sanctuary, medieval castles often had multiple people sharing a room. Noble children, attendants, servants, and guards might all be housed within the same space or in adjacent rooms with only curtains or wooden partitions between them. Privacy was a relative concept. Conversations, movements, and noises were commonplace throughout the night, complicating efforts to get a restful sleep. The grandeur of the chamber was less about solitude and more about demonstrating power, hosting visitors, and maintaining appearances. The role of fireplaces and braziers fireplaces were crucial to any medieval bedroom, but had limitations. While a roaring fire could provide welcome warmth, fireplaces were often inefficient at heating large stone rooms. They also consumed valuable firewood, which could be scarce during harsh winters. Many castles supplemented fireplaces with braziers, metal containers filled with hot coals that could be moved closer to the bed or seating area. These provided localized warmth, but also posed risks of smoke inhalation or accidental fires. The balance between warmth, safety, and smoke management was delicate, and castle dwellers had to navigate these challenges nightly. Tapestries and wall hangings, decorative and functional. To combat the cold stone and enhance comfort, tapestries and heavy draperies were hung on walls and around beds. These textiles served multiple purposes. Beyond their artistic and decorative appeal, they acted as rudimentary insulation, helping to trap warm air and block cold drafts. Tapestries often depicted scenes of hunting, mythology, or heraldry, reinforcing the noble family's prestige and lineage. The soft fabrics also muffled sounds, somewhat reducing the echo and creating a cozier atmosphere amid the hard, cold stone. The influence of status on bedroom conditions. Even within castle life, bedroom conditions varied widely based on status. The lord and lady of the castle had the largest, best-appointed chambers with the most elaborate beds, richest fabrics, and largest fireplaces. In contrast, lesser nobles, stewards, or favored servants had simpler rooms, often colder, smaller, and less adorned. Some high-ranking nobles had private oratory rooms attached to their bedrooms for prayer, reflecting their religious devotion and the era's intertwining of faith and daily life. Illumination at night, flickering flames, and shadows. Lighting in castle bedrooms came mainly from candles and oil lamps. These provided dim, flickering light that cast long shadows on the stone walls and ornate furnishings. The limited lighting affected how people perceived their surroundings at night, often adding to feelings of unease or mystery. Nobles sometimes employed attendants whose job was to carry candles or lamps to light the way when moving through the castle at night. The reality behind the romance. While romanticized images of castles often emphasize luxury and splendor, the reality was far more complex. Medieval castle bedrooms were spaces where comfort was hard-won and harsh realities of medieval life intruded even into the sleeping quarters of the powerful. The struggle against cold, pests, noise, and the ever-present threat of danger shaped nightly routines. This juxtaposition of glamour and grit created a unique medieval experience where beauty and brutality coexisted within the same stone walls. 15. Midnight emergencies, fire, flood, and foul odors. When darkness fell over medieval towns and castles, the night was far from peaceful or predictable. Beyond the struggle to keep warm or fend off pests, the medieval sleeper had to face a host of sudden and unpleasant emergencies that could shatter the fragile calm of night. Fires, floods, and foul odors were constant dangers, turning even the grandest chambers into chaotic scenes in the blink of an eye. The ever-present threat of fire was one of the most dreaded hazards in any medieval home or castle, and it rarely respected the quiet hours of the night. Candles, oil lamps, and fireplaces were the primary sources of light and warmth, but they were also the primary culprits of accidental fires. Even a small spark could ignite the flammable materials common in bedrooms: wooden furniture, tapestries, bedding, and straw mattresses. Imagine a candle left unattended on a bedside table, its flame flickering dangerously close to a loose curtain or a pile of clothes. A sudden draft could cause the flame to leap, quickly engulfing the fabric and spreading rapidly through a chamber. Such fires often erupted at night, catching sleepers unawares. Because medieval buildings were constructed largely from timber, stone, and thatch roofing, materials prone to rapid combustion, the risk of a devastating blaze was always high. The lack of modern firefighting tools meant that a single spark could cause widespread destruction, sometimes engulfing entire parts of a castle or village before help arrived. The panic and response. When fire broke out, the response was chaotic and fraught with danger. Waking suddenly in the dark, people had to quickly locate the source of smoke or flame, rouse others, and attempt to extinguish the fire, often with buckets of water, sand, or rudimentary firefighting equipment. Medieval residents were trained in basic fire drills, but in the dead of night, confusion and panic were common. Flames spreading through wooden beams or thatched roofs often forced people to flee their homes in haste, sometimes losing precious belongings or even lives. The fear of fire was so great that many families slept with water buckets nearby or maintained watch shifts to spot flames early. Some castles had stone walls and moats to slow fire spread, but inside wooden interiors, safety was never guaranteed. Floods and leaks. The nighttime deluge. Water was a double-edged sword in medieval bedrooms. While essential for daily life, it also caused unexpected disruptions, especially at night. Roofs made from wooden shingles or thatch were prone to leaks, especially after heavy rainstorms. Without modern waterproofing or gutters, water often seeped through cracks and gaps, dripping onto bedding or floors. A common nighttime emergency was waking up soaked from a roof leak or dripping ceiling. The sound of persistent water drops, the sudden cold splash on skin, or the slow soaking of mattresses and blankets could jolt sleepers awake. These leaks not only made sleep uncomfortable, but also risked health issues from prolonged exposure to dampness. Wet bedding became a breeding ground for mold and mildew, contributing to respiratory illnesses and joint pain. Floorboards and foundations. The seepage problem. Leaky roofs were just one part of the problem. Medieval homes and castles often had uneven floors made from wood planks, packed earth, or stone slabs. These floors were vulnerable to seepage from heavy rains or rising groundwater, causing pools of water to collect in low areas. When water gathered under beds or near doorways, it could saturate straw mattresses or wooden bed frames, leading to uncomfortable and unsanitary conditions. In flood-prone areas, heavy rains could cause entire ground floors to become waterlogged, forcing inhabitants to move valuables and bedding to upper chambers or lofts. Sleeping above a damp floor was not just unpleasant, but a risk factor for illnesses caused by prolonged exposure to cold and moisture. Overflowing chamber pots. A smelly surprise. Sanitation in the medieval period was rudimentary at best, and the nighttime brought its own set of messy challenges. Chamber pots were the standard solution for relieving oneself during the night. These pots, usually made of ceramic or metal, were kept under or near beds for convenience. However, accidents were frequent. Chamber pots could be tipped over in the dark, spilling urine or waste onto floors or bedding. Sometimes they simply overflowed, if not emptied promptly. The smell of human waste wafting through a bedroom was both a humiliation and a health hazard, It attracted flies and rodents and contaminated sleeping areas. The unpleasant odors could wake sleepers abruptly, adding to the discomfort of a night's rest. The battle against foul smells in medieval bedrooms were common and came from a variety of sources beyond chamber pots and dampness. Food storage within or near sleeping quarters was often necessary due to lack of space or security. Rotten or spoiled food left unattended gave off stench that lingered in the confined spaces. Garbage and waste disposal were rudimentary, and refuse sometimes accumulated near homes or inside less frequented rooms, releasing unpleasant odors that crept into living spaces. Mold and mildew growing on damp walls, textiles, and wood contributed to a persistent mustiness in the air. To combat these smells, people used herbs, flowers, or incense, sometimes hanging bundles of lavender, rosemary, or sage near windows or beds. Burning fragrant resins or smoldering herbs was also a nighttime ritual to purify the air and mask the more offensive odors. Coping mechanisms. Sleeping through discomfort. Despite these nightly challenges, fires, floods, spills, and stench, medieval people developed remarkable resilience. Many simply adapted to sleeping in less than ideal conditions, learning to block out unpleasant smells or sounds as part of their nightly routine. Bed curtains and canopy walls helped create a small, safe zone where odors and drafts were somewhat reduced. People often slept in heavier clothing or wrapped tightly in blankets to protect themselves from dampness and chill. Those who could afford it had servants or attendants whose jobs included nighttime tasks like emptying chamber pots, stoking fires, or tending to leaks. But even then, emergencies could strike unexpectedly. The social impact of nighttime disruptions. Midnight emergencies weren't just personal inconveniences, they could disrupt entire households or communities. A fire in a castle or town could send residents scrambling, waking neighbors and alerting guards or watchmen. Flooding or persistent leaks could cause damage requiring urgent repairs, drawing resources and labor away from daily life. Odors and unsanitary conditions sometimes led to illnesses that impacted families and servants alike, increasing the burden on medieval healthcare, which was already limited. Sleep disruption due to these emergencies affected productivity and morale. A night spent awake, battling fire, or cleaning up floods could leave people exhausted the next day. 16. Midnight beliefs, witches, spirits, and the witching hour. In the medieval imagination, midnight was far from just the middle of the night. It was a time charged with ominous energy, a threshold between the natural and supernatural realms. Often called the witching hour, midnight was believed to be the moment when dark forces gathered their strength, and the veil between the living world and the spirit world grew thin. These beliefs profoundly shaped how medieval people lived, feared, and even slept during the darkest hours. The Devil's Hour. Why midnight terrified? The idea that midnight was the devil's hour originated from a mixture of religious teachings, folklore, and cultural fear of the unknown. Midnight symbolized the deepest part of darkness, both literal and spiritual. The absence of sunlight was interpreted as an invitation to evil spirits, demons, and witches who were thought to roam freely when human vigilance waned. Church sermons often warned congregations about the dangers of wandering or engaging in frivolous activities after midnight, framing the hour as a time when evil forces were most active and humans were most vulnerable. This fear was so widespread that people planned their routines to avoid being outside or alone after midnight, locking doors, lighting extra candles, and reciting prayers to ward off evil. Avoiding midnight activities, social and religious customs. Many medieval customs revolved around avoiding certain behaviors during the witching hour. Superstition dictated that people should refrain from traveling alone at midnight. It was believed the roads and forests were especially dangerous then, with witches, spirits, or demonic creatures lurking. Working or doing chores. Certain tasks, especially those involving sharp tools or spiritual significance, like spinning or weaving, were considered risky as they might attract malevolent attention. Speaking aloud or making noise. To avoid drawing unwanted supernatural visitors, silence was often preferred. Some communities even instituted curfews or night watches to ensure people remained indoors and safe from nocturnal evil. Sleep paralysis and demonic attacks. One of the most terrifying experiences attributed to the witching hour was what modern science calls sleep paralysis, a state where a person wakes or is semi-conscious but unable to move, often accompanied by a sensation of pressure or a frightening presence in the room. In medieval times, this was explained as a demonic visitation or attack, often by an incubus or succubus, male or female demons believed to torment sleeping humans, sometimes with sexual overtones. Descriptions from medieval texts and folklore often recount how victims felt a heavy weight on their chests, heard strange noises, or saw shadowy figures pressing down on them during sleep. These experiences were terrifying and reinforced beliefs that midnight was a time when evil could invade the most vulnerable moments of human life: sleep. To protect against these attacks, people employed various charms, prayers, or physical protections like hanging iron, crosses, or sacred texts near the bed. Cats, owls, and night animals, familiar spirits of witches. Certain animals were closely associated with midnight and its dark powers, believed to act as familiars, spirits or demons that assisted witches in their magic. Cats, especially black cats, were feared as witch familiars. Their nocturnal habits, mysterious movements, and glowing eyes made them perfect symbols of the supernatural. Many believed cats could spy for witches or even transform into witches themselves. Owls were seen as messengers or companions of the dead, their eerie calls at night portending doom or spiritual unrest. Their silent flight and nocturnal nature linked them closely to the mysterious forces active during the witching hour. Bats, toads, and ravens also carried similar associations, each animal embodying different aspects of darkness, death, or witchcraft in folklore. Because of these beliefs, encounters with such animals at night were often met with fear and suspicion. Seeing a black cat cross one's path at midnight could be interpreted as a bad omen. Midnight gatherings and witch Sabbaths. Medieval legends spoke of witches gathering at midnight for secret rituals known as witch Sabbaths. These nocturnal meetings were imagined as wild, blasphemous celebrations where witches worshipped the devil, cast spells, and conspired against the Christian order. The belief in these midnight gatherings fueled widespread paranoia and witch hunts, as communities feared that some neighbors might secretly be involved in dark magic. Descriptions of Sabbaths often included dancing around fires or in secluded forests, flying through the air, sometimes on broomsticks or animals, consorting with demons or the devil himself. While modern historians debate the reality of such events, the fear they generated deeply affected medieval social life, influencing laws, punishments, and social suspicion. Protection rituals against midnight evil. Given the pervasive fear of midnight's dangers, people developed a variety of protective rituals to safeguard themselves, their families, and their homes. Holy water and salt were sprinkled around doorways or beds to create barriers against evil spirits. Crosses and crucifixes were placed prominently near sleeping areas. Prayers and psalms were recited before sleep, especially the Lord's Prayer, believed to shield from demonic interference. Amulets and charms, often containing iron, a metal thought to repel spirits, were carried or hung near beds. In some regions, people would place sharp objects, like knives or scissors, near their pillows to ward off nocturnal visitors. These rituals were deeply ingrained in daily life, providing psychological comfort and a sense of control in a world full of unseen threats. The role of clergy and exorcisms. When midnight fears became too overwhelming, or when a family experienced persistent night terrors or believed they were cursed, they might seek help from the clergy. priests performed blessings, exorcisms, and spiritual cleansings designed to drive out evil spirits and restore peace to troubled households. These rites were often elaborate, involving holy water, incense, sacred texts, and prayers. The Church's involvement reinforced the idea that midnight's dangers were real spiritual battles between good and evil. Folklore and literature. Midnight's haunting. Influence. Midnight's dark reputation found vivid expression in medieval literature, ballads, and folklore. Stories of ghostly apparitions, cursed souls, and haunted places were often set at or around midnight. The hour symbolized a boundary where normal rules no longer applied, and the fantastic or horrific could emerge. These tales not only entertained, but also reinforced social norms, warning against sinful behavior, promoting piety, and encouraging caution in the night. Midnight and the human psyche. Beyond the external fears, midnight had a profound psychological impact. The silence and isolation of the hour stirred deep anxieties and unease. The darkness fueled imagination, making ordinary sounds or shadows appear sinister. Sleep itself became a battleground between rest and fear, with some people too afraid to sleep deeply or alone during the witching hour. This shared cultural experience shaped medieval mental health and social behavior in ways that modern people might struggle to imagine. 17. Sleep and sin. Nighttime temptations. The medieval world was deeply shaped by religious doctrine, where the concepts of sin and virtue penetrated nearly every aspect of daily life, including the realm of sleep and dreams. Far from being a neutral or restful state, sleep was often viewed with suspicion as a potential battleground for the soul's purity. This was especially true when it came to sexual desires, which were seen as not just bodily urges, but spiritual dangers to be controlled, even during unconsciousness. The moral weight of dreams, more than fantasy. In medieval Christianity, dreams were not dismissed as mere illusions or random firings of the brain. Instead, they were often understood as reflections of the soul state and messages from the divine or demonic realms. Consequently, lustful or sexual dreams were laden with moral significance. If a person experienced a wet dream, involuntary ejaculation during sleep, it was commonly considered a sign of sinful impurity, even if unintentional. The body's natural functions were no excuse. The soul was still accountable. Such dreams were thought to reflect the hidden struggles between the individual's will and the temptations that assailed them even in unconsciousness. This made the act of dreaming about sexual matters a source of shame, guilt, and fear for many. Confession and the burden of nocturnal sins. The confessional was a central institution in medieval spiritual life where sins were named, judged, and absolved. But the boundaries of confession extended into the dream world as well. Dreams, particularly those of a sexual or lustful nature, were often confessed with the same seriousness as waking sins. Monks, priests, and confessors urged penitents to be truthful about their nocturnal temptations and urged spiritual discipline to combat these urges. Interestingly, some penitential manuals of the time include detailed guidance on how to confess sins that were experienced in dreams, underscoring how seriously the Church treated this issue. This created a psychological tension for individuals. They were expected to maintain purity, not only when awake, but also in the vulnerable state of sleep. The threat of succubi and incubi. Nighttime tempters. Medieval folklore and theology were rife with stories of succubi and incubi, demonic beings that seduced people during sleep. Succubi, female demons, were said to visit men in their dreams, tempting them into sin, sometimes draining life force or causing harm. Incubi, their male counterparts, supposedly preyed on women in similar ways. These entities were blamed for many sexual dreams and nocturnal emissions, reinforcing the belief that sinful urges during sleep were not just internal struggles, but attacks by malevolent supernatural forces. The fear of being seduced or assaulted by these demons made nighttime a perilous period for the soul. people took protective measures such as prayers, amulets, or holy water to shield themselves before sleeping. Monastic perspectives. Striving for nocturnal purity. Monks and clergy were among the most rigorous in their teachings about controlling lust and maintaining purity. Their views extended to sleep, where temptation was considered especially dangerous because the soul was less able to defend itself. Monastic rules often included advisories against indulging in sexual thoughts before sleep to avoid inviting sinful dreams. Encouragement of mental prayers and meditations before bed to guard the mind. Strict discipline regarding confession of any nocturnal sins or temptations seen as necessary for spiritual health. For monks who took vows of celibacy, managing desires during sleep was a profound spiritual challenge, often addressed through ascetic practices and continuous prayer. The psychological toll, guilt and anxiety. Over natural bodily functions, the medieval emphasis on sinfulness in sleep could cause real psychological distress. Normal bodily functions such as erections or emissions were seen as signs of spiritual failure, leading to anxiety and shame. This was especially difficult for young men and boys undergoing puberty when such nocturnal events became frequent. Without the modern understanding of physiology, they were left to grapple with guilt over processes they could not control. Some medical treatises from the time even linked wet dreams to physical weakness or illness, adding a layer of physical worry to the moral concerns. Nightmares and moral warning. Not all sexual dreams were pleasurable or tempting. Many were nightmares reflecting fear, guilt, or divine punishment. Some believed that these dreams served as warnings or chastisements from God, urging the dreamer to repent and reform. Dreams of seduction by demons could symbolize the soul's peril and the need for spiritual vigilance. The interpretation of such dreams often led to increased prayer, fasting, or other penances as a form of atonement. Gender and sleep sin. Different expectations for men and women. Medieval teachings about nocturnal sin were gendered. Men were often warned about the dangers of succubi and the temptations to lust during sleep, while women were cautioned against incubi and the spiritual risks of sexual dreams. Women, especially nuns or virgins, were expected to guard their purity rigorously, even during sleep. Sexual dreams or involuntary physical responses could be interpreted as signs of spiritual weakness or moral danger for both genders, but were framed differently based on prevailing social roles and religious ideals. Remedies and rituals. Combating nighttime temptations. To prevent sinful dreams and nocturnal impurities, people employed various rituals and remedies. Prayer before sleep, reciting psalms or the Lord's Prayer to purify the mind and soul. Holy objects, keeping crosses, relics, or blessed water near the bed. Mental discipline, visualizing purity or focusing on spiritual thoughts before sleep. Diet and lifestyle, avoiding foods or behaviors believed to increase lustful dreams, such as rich meals or alcohol. Some believed that certain herbs could calm the body and mind to prevent tempting dreams. These practices reflect a holistic approach to managing both body and spirit during the vulnerable hours of sleep. Cultural reflections, art, literature, and popular beliefs. Medieval art and literature occasionally depict themes of nighttime temptation and the struggle against sin in sleep. Dream visions, moral allegories, and saints' lives describe battles with lustful temptations, sometimes highlighting miraculous protections or the consequences of failure. Popular ballads or stories might warn listeners about the dangers of allowing the mind to wander at night, reinforcing societal expectations of vigilance and purity. The legacy of medieval sleep and sin beliefs. While many medieval views on sleep and sin may seem harsh or superstitious today, they illuminate the deep intertwining of spirituality, morality, and the human experience of sleep in that era. They show how the most private human experience, dreaming and unconscious desire, was subject to moral scrutiny, shaping attitudes and behaviors across society. Understanding these beliefs helps us appreciate the cultural context of medieval life and the complex ways people sought to protect their souls during the vulnerable hours of rest. 18. Royal sleep, kings, queens, and courtiers. When imagining medieval royalty, images of opulence, power, and grandeur naturally come to mind. However, sleep, that most basic human need, was far from simple or private, even for kings and queens. The nighttime world of medieval monarchs and their courtiers blended luxury with ritual, security, politics, and social theater, turning sleep into a complex, public affair rather than a purely restful retreat. The lavishness of royal bedding. More than comfort. Unlike peasants and even many nobles, royalty had access to some of the finest materials known in the medieval world. Royal beds were often masterpieces of craftsmanship and decoration, symbolizing status and divine right. Imported feathers and down. Beds stuffed with down feathers from geese or swans were prized for their softness and warmth. These materials were imported from distant lands, making them costly and rare. Silk and velvet linens. While commoners used coarse wool or linen, royal bedclothes were often made from silks, velvets, and brocades. These fabrics not only offered comfort, but also visually communicated wealth and power. Canopies and draperies. Elaborate canopies were hung around royal beds, often embroidered with gold thread and heraldic symbols. These curtains provided some privacy in large chambers and helped keep out drafts. Yet this opulence came with drawbacks. The heavy fabrics and layers could be stifling or hot, and the elaborate construction meant the bed was more a stage for display than a cocoon of rest. Royal bedrooms as ceremonial spaces. Royal sleeping quarters were rarely purely private. Instead, they were central rooms for ceremony, diplomacy, and political theater. Public audiences. It was not unusual for courtiers, nobles, or even foreign emissaries to be admitted into the royal bedchamber during waking hours. The monarch's presence in bed symbolized power, vulnerability, or generosity, depending on the context. Royal bed as throne. Substitute. In some cases, the royal bed was an extension of the throne room. Monarchs might receive important visitors while partially reclined, turning sleep into a semi-public, performative act. Beds as political tools. The location, decoration, and use of the royal bedchamber communicated messages about authority and legitimacy. For example, holding court in the bedchamber emphasized the king or queen's central role in governance and the divine order. This meant that the royal bedroom was a place where politics and power were negotiated, far from the quiet and private sanctuaries we might expect. Constant vigilance. Guards in the royal bedchamber's security was a paramount concern for medieval royalty, especially at night. Kings and queens were vulnerable to assassination, poisoning, or capture during sleep, so their chambers were heavily guarded. Sleeping with guards. Unlike common folk, monarchs did not sleep in solitude. Trusted guards or attendants were posted in the room, sometimes even in the same chamber or adjoining spaces. Night watches. The guards maintained a continuous watch, often changing shifts throughout the night to ensure alertness. This constant human presence created a noisy, active environment that made uninterrupted sleep difficult. Bodyguards and trusted courtiers. Close courtiers or bodyguards often stayed close by, ready to respond to any threat. Their presence reflected both the monarch's precarious position and the importance of the royal personage. Trust and paranoia. At times, the need for vigilance bred paranoia. Monarchs might suspect even those close to them of plotting betrayal, leading to heightened tension around the bedchamber. Thus, the royal night was one of uneasy rest, punctuated by constant watchfulness and the awareness of potential danger. The ritual of the royal bedtime. Going to bed for a king or queen was more than a private routine. It was often a highly ritualized process involving multiple attendants and symbolic acts. Preparation. Before retiring, the monarch's bed would be prepared with great care by chamberlains or ladies-in-waiting. This included laying out the finest linens, adjusting the canopies, and ensuring the room was warmed by braziers or tapestries. Night attire. Royals wore luxurious but often cumbersome night clothes, such as silk robes or fur-lined gowns. These garments reflected status but could also impede relaxation. Assistance. Many monarchs required help getting into bed, including assistance with nightcaps, blankets, and positioning. This personal care was both practical and a display of courtly devotion. Prayers and blessings. Before sleep, religious rites or prayers were often performed, either by the monarch personally or by a chaplain present in the room, invoking divine protection through the vulnerable hours of night. This theatrical bedtime routine reinforced the monarch's elevated status, even in moments of private vulnerability. Royal children and nighttime care. A mix of luxury and tradition. Despite their wealth, royal children's sleep was not radically different from commoners in many respects, especially in infancy. Swaddling practices. Royal infants were often tightly swaddled, wrapped securely in fine linens or silk. Swaddling was thought to protect the baby's limbs and promote healthy development, but it also symbolized control over the body from birth. Shared sleeping arrangements. Like peasants, royal children frequently slept in close proximity to their caregivers, wet nurses, or attendants, for warmth and safety. Though their surroundings were luxurious, the intimacy of shared sleep was universal. Nighttime rituals. Royal infants and children were surrounded by attendants who sang lullabies, recited prayers, and performed rituals to protect against nightmares or evil spirits. Health concerns. Even for royal children, nighttime vulnerability to illness or suffocation was a constant worry. Specialized cradles or bassinets were sometimes employed, but mortality rates remained high. Thus, the care of royal children at night combined material wealth with enduring medieval traditions around sleep and protection. The challenges of royal sleep. Physical and social. Despite all the luxury, medieval royal sleep was not always restful or peaceful. Uncomfortable surroundings. Stone castle walls were cold and damp, and even with elaborate bedding, the chill could seep in. Sleeping near open hearths could cause smoke or heat discomfort. Social interruptions. Monarchs were frequently awakened for late-night audiences, petitions, or emergencies. The idea of a long, uninterrupted sleep was often unrealistic. Psychological burdens. The pressures of ruling, combined with concerns about safety, succession, and intrigue, could cause stress and insomnia, affecting sleep quality. Health and hygiene. Despite the finery, royal bedchambers were not immune to pests like fleas or lice, which could disrupt sleep and health. The king or queen's nighttime experience was a complex mix of comfort, ritual, tension, and vulnerability. The symbolism of royal sleep. Royal sleep carried heavy symbolic meaning in medieval culture, divine right and vulnerability. The monarch's sleep embodied the paradox of human vulnerability paired with divine authority. While kings and queens could be physically vulnerable at night, their role was to represent order and protection for the realm. Sleep as a metaphor. Literary and religious texts often used royal sleep to symbolize the health of the kingdom or the spiritual state of the ruler. Ceremonial awakening. The moment the monarch woke could be ceremonial, signaling the start of governance, justice, or public duties. Thus, sleep was woven deeply into the mythology and reality of kingship. 19. Nature's alarm clock, birds, bells, and bladders. In the medieval world, the concept of a mechanical alarm clock was as foreign as flying machines or smartphones. The rhythms of waking were dictated almost entirely by nature, routine, and the human body itself. Before the era of clocks and watches, people relied on a blend of environmental cues, communal signals, and personal physical needs to rise from their beds and face the day ahead. This interwoven system created a uniquely organic alarm clock that was surprisingly effective for the time. Dawn's early call, the roosters and birds. One of the most familiar wake-up calls in the medieval countryside was the crowing of the rooster. This natural alarm clock was so central that roosters were a staple in almost every village, town, and estate. Roosters as social and practical necessities. The crow of a rooster just before sunrise was not only a signal of dawn, but also a prompt to begin daily labor, whether in the fields, workshops, or households. The natural rhythm of the rooster's call became deeply embedded in people's daily schedules. Birdsong beyond roosters. In addition to the rooster, various songbirds, larks, blackbirds, and thrushes heralded morning light with their melodies. These birdsong symphonies often marked different phases of dawn, from first light to full daybreak. Symbolism of birds and dawn. Medieval literature and folklore often linked birdsong with spiritual awakening or divine messages. The morning chorus was seen not just as a natural occurrence, but as a blessing, a herald of new beginnings. Roosters and religious life. Roosters also had symbolic meaning in Christianity, associated with vigilance and repentance, famously linked to the story of Peter's denial of Christ. Their crowing reminded both peasants and nobles of spiritual as well as temporal duties. In towns and cities, though roosters were less common, the natural bird call still served as a gentle reminder that the sun was rising and it was time to wake. The church bells. Timekeepers of the community. With the spread of Christianity and the rise of monastic life, church bells became crucial in marking time for medieval communities. Bells as time announcers. Most villages and towns had at least one church bell tower, and the ringing of bells was used to announce canonical hours, specific prayer times throughout the day and night. Early morning bells, like matins or lauds, often rang around dawn, signaling time for devout Christians to rise for prayer. Regulating daily life. Beyond religious use, church bells also regulated secular activities, signaling market openings, curfews, or important town meetings. These chimes formed a sonic rhythm that governed waking, working, and sleeping hours. Audible range and impact. Bells were loud and could be heard over large distances, waking not only residents but travelers or people in nearby fields. Their sound was a constant reminder of communal structure and shared life. Emotional and spiritual resonance. The sound of bells was thought to cleanse evil spirits or protect the town from harm, adding a layer of spiritual comfort to the waking experience. For many medieval people, the church bell was the most reliable clock to rise by, especially in urban settings where nature's cues were muffled by buildings and daily bustle. No clocks? No problem. Body rhythms dictate. Waking. In the absence of personal clocks, medieval men and women tuned in closely to their own bodies to know when to rise. Internal biological clock. The human circadian rhythm, our natural sleep-wake cycle, was the most dependable alarm for most people. They often woke with the first light or when their internal clock signaled that enough rest had been had. Early to bed, early to rise. Due to the dependence on natural light and labor demands, people generally went to bed shortly after sunset and rose shortly before or at dawn, creating a roughly 8 to 10 hour sleep cycle adapted to the day's length. Variations by season. As days grew longer in summer and shorter in winter, sleep duration and waking times shifted accordingly, naturally aligning people with the solar cycle. Awakening without devices. Unlike today's harsh digital alarms, waking was usually gradual, often accompanied by the rising sun warming the room or animals stirring nearby. This made waking a gentler, less jarring process for many. The call of nature, bladders, and early rising. One of the most universal and pragmatic reasons medieval people woke up was physical need, especially the urgent call of nature. Limited nighttime facilities. Bathrooms as we know them didn't exist. Most people used chamber pots, which were emptied at first light. But the discomfort of holding one's bladder overnight was a common reason for early waking. Potty training and young children. Even children, swaddled and kept close to parents, sometimes woke due to the discomfort of full bladders or soiled linens. This meant family members often stirred multiple times at night. Cold weather and physical needs. In colder months, bodily needs could be intensified. Cold air made bladders more sensitive, and the need to relieve oneself could awaken even heavy sleepers. Practical morning chores. Waking early to empty chamber pots and clean the sleeping area was part of the morning routine, making this bodily need a practical communal cue. The role of noise and discomfort in waking medieval sleeping environments were rarely silent or perfectly comfortable, which also contributed to how and when people woke. Street noise and activity. In towns, the bustling sounds of carts, market vendors setting up, and animals moving about contributed to the morning awakening. Household stirring. Within homes, the crackling of hearth fires, preparation of meals, and the movements of family members or servants could stir sleepers. Environmental factors, weather, such as the crowing of birds in spring or the howl of wind in winter, also influenced waking times. Physical discomfort, poor bedding, cold drafts, or cramped sleeping positions meant many people woke as soon as discomfort arose rather than sleeping straight through. The social aspect of waking. Shared times and community rhythm. Waking was rarely a solitary experience in the medieval world. It was deeply tied to social life and communal schedules. Family and household. Families often rose together to begin the day's chores. This communal waking reinforced family bonds and synchronized work. Farmers and laborers. Those who worked the land needed to rise early to maximize daylight, and neighbors might wake each other through noise or direct calls. Craftsmen and market folk. In towns, craftspeople had strict market schedules, so their waking was aligned with communal commerce and guild regulations. Religious communities, monks and nuns, while having rigid prayer schedules, still synchronized their waking with natural light and church bells, blending nature and ritual. Modern parallels. What we can learn from medieval wakefulness. Though medieval waking lacked digital alarms, the reliance on nature, body cues, and community gave people a rhythm closely connected to the environment. Circadian health. Their alignment with natural light and darkness may have promoted healthier sleep cycles than our modern artificial light-driven lives. Communal support, shared waking times created social support and accountability that reinforced daily routines. Physical awareness. Being tuned into bodily needs like bladder signals highlights the importance of bodily cues we sometimes ignore today. 20. A world without pillows, but full of ritual. As we close our journey into the strange, shadowed world of medieval sleep, it's worth pausing to reflect on the vast gulf between those restless nights and our own modern slumber. Imagine for a moment a night in the Middle Ages. No soft pillows cradling your head, no plush mattress yielding under your weight, no thick blankets woven from cotton or down, just hard straw or wooden benches, shared spaces crowded with strangers or animals, flickering candlelight casting uncertain shadows on stone walls. It's a world both foreign and fascinating, a world where sleep was not just rest, but ritual, survival, and even superstition. The absence of pillows. A subtle but striking contrast. The humble pillow, so commonplace today, was often missing or rudimentary in medieval bedrooms. While some wealthy nobles might have had a small cushion or a stuffed linen bag to support their head, most people simply rested their heads on the rough fabric or bare wood. No cloud of comfort. Without the softness of pillows to cradle the neck, sleepers faced the harshness of their surroundings more directly. This absence shaped the very posture and quality of sleep, requiring resilience and adaptation. Neck and spine. Awareness. The hard surfaces may have caused stiffness or soreness, but they also fostered a grounded physical connection to the space where one rested. Sleep was not a gentle drifting away, but a more tactile, embodied experience. Pillows as a status symbol. When pillows did appear, they were a sign of wealth and luxury, often embroidered with intricate patterns or filled with feathers from exotic birds, a far cry from the sparse bedding of common folk. Rituals, the heartbeat of medieval sleep. Though the physical comforts of medieval sleep were sparse, the nightly rituals surrounding sleep were rich and deeply meaningful. The night was not just for rest. Sleep was intertwined with spiritual practices, prayers, protective charms, and superstitions designed to guard against evil spirits or bad dreams. These rituals transformed the act of sleeping into a sacred passage through darkness. Community and connection. Many rituals were shared, from the lullabies that blended soothing melodies with prayers to communal waking times marked by church bells. Sleep was part of a broader social and spiritual rhythm, connecting individuals to family, village, and faith. A dance between fear and hope. The night held many fears: the witching hour, demons, sleep paralysis, yet rituals offered comfort, a way to push back against the unknown and embrace rest with courage. Gratitude for modern comforts. As we reflect on the medieval night, it naturally invites gratitude for the luxuries we now take for granted. Modern mattresses and pillows. Today, we sleep on mattresses designed for ergonomic support and temperature control. Pillows conform to our heads and necks, offering softness and cushioning unimaginable to medieval sleepers. Heating and insulation. Central heating and well-insulated homes keep our bedrooms cozy year-round. No need to huddle near livestock or hot stones for warmth. Sanitation and safety. Modern plumbing and sanitation systems free us from the nightly discomforts of chamber pots and foul odors. Safe, enclosed sleeping spaces offer privacy and peace of mind. Light and technology. While artificial light can disrupt sleep patterns, it also allows us control over our environment. Soft bedside lamps, blackout curtains, and white noise machines help us craft ideal conditions for rest. Recognizing these comforts can deepen our appreciation for the simple, often invisible blessings of a good night's sleep. The beauty of the strange and fascinating past. Despite the hardships, the medieval way of sleeping is a reminder of human resilience and creativity in the face of limited resources. Inventiveness and adaptation. From hanging garlic over beds to sharing warmth with animals, medieval people developed inventive solutions to the challenges of sleep. Connection to nature. Their sleep rhythms were intimately tied to the natural world, the sun, the seasons, and the sounds of animals. This attunement fostered a deep, if sometimes difficult, harmony with the environment. The mystery of sleep itself. The past invites us to marvel at sleep as a universal human experience, something mysterious, essential, and shared across centuries, no matter the conditions. This reflection encourages us not only to learn from history, but to honor the fundamental need for rest that unites all humans. Whispering into restful sleep. A gentle outro. Now, as your own day winds down and you prepare to close your eyes, let the echoes of this journey soothe your mind. Feel the softness of your pillow beneath your head, the warmth of your blankets, and the quiet peace of your space. Imagine the contrast, you resting safely and comfortably, cradled by modern ease and care. Breathe deeply and slowly, letting the tension of the day melt away. With each breath, imagine the centuries of sleepers who came before you, each carrying their own worries, hopes, and dreams into the night. As your eyelids grow heavy, picture the flickering candlelight in a distant medieval chamber, the quiet prayers whispered before sleep, the watchful stars above. Rest easy, knowing that your sleep is a gift, one woven through history, shaped by countless rituals, struggles, and comforts. A final thought. Sleep, whether in a humble straw-filled bed or a cloud-like modern mattress, remains a sacred retreat. It is the space where our minds heal, our bodies restore, and our spirits find renewal. So as you drift gently into rest, let gratitude fill your heart for the comfort you know, and a quiet curiosity remain for the strange, fascinating worlds where sleep looked very different, yet meant just as much. Good night.